Thank you so much for watching the Thom Hartmann Program, our program here on Free Speech TV. We really appreciate it. The main way that we support our program, that all of us who work here get our paychecks and that we keep the lights on and whatnot here. Free Speech TV does that by asking you to donate, a couple times a year, and that keeps Free Speech TV alive. We keep our show alive principally, mostly, by advertising. We have advertisers who pay the bills. They support the program. And we've told you about some of them in the past, but really want to just move all that onto the internet. So if you would like to support our program by supporting our underwriters, our advertisers, you can go to thomhartmann.com. There's a complete list of them, or there will be soon, and just click on their little ads and find out what they have and be there for them and for us. Thank you so much. Today we're reading from Threshold, the Progressive Plan to Pull America Back from the Brink by Thom Hartmann. And this is from Chapter 2, The Economy. The epigraph Woody Guthrie's saying, some men rob you with a six-gun, others rob you with a fountain pen. The title, the opening part of this chapter, The Coup of the Elites. The election of 1992 pitted Bill Clinton against George H.W. Bush. While Bush was running as a conservative who was compassionate enough to hope for 1,000 points of privatized non-governmental light, Clinton campaigned as an unabashed FDR, believing in government as a solution liberal. In language reminiscent of Teddy Roosevelt's Progressive Square Deal and FDR's Progressive New Deal, Clinton proposed a new covenant between the U.S. government and U.S. citizens. In a speech at Georgetown University on October 23, 1991, he declared, "We've got to rebuild our political life before the demagogues and the racists and those who pander to the worst in us bring this country down. People once looked at the president and the Congress to bring us together, to solve problems, to make progress. Now, in the face of massive challenges, our government stands discredited, our people are disillusioned. There's a hole in our politics where our sense of common purpose used to be. To turn America around, we've got to have a new approach, founded on our most sacred principles as a nation, with a vision for the future. We need a new covenant, a solemn agreement between the people and their government to provide opportunity for everybody, inspire responsibility throughout our society, and restore a sense of community to our great nation. A new covenant to take government back from the powerful interests in the bureaucracy and give it back to the ordinary people of our country." More than 200 years ago, our founding fathers outlined our first social compact between government and the people, not just between lords and kings. More than 100 years ago, Abraham Lincoln gave his life to maintain the union that compact created. More than 60 years ago, Franklin Roosevelt renewed that promise with a New Deal that offered opportunity in return for hard work. Today, we need to forge a new covenant that will repair the damaged bond between the people and their government, restore our basic values, embed the idea that a country has the responsibility to help people get ahead, but that the citizens have not only the right, but the responsibility to rise as far and fast as their talents and determination can take them. And most important of all, that we're all in this together. We have to make good on the words of Thomas Jefferson, who once said, "A debt of service is due from every man to his country, proportional to the bounties which nature and fortune have measured to him." End of quote from Bill Clinton. Americans loved it. A majority of voters in 1992 were old enough to remember what America was like under the 1940 to 1981 New Deal era, when a single worker with a good job had health care, a pension, and could raise a family and buy a home. When the GI Bill educated millions. When hospitals and health insurance companies in nearly every state were required by law to be not-for-profit corporations, and health care was inexpensive and widely available. And they noticed that the 12 years of Reagan and Bush had begun the process of shattering that historic era, that the middle class was slipping away, the government had become remote and hostile rather than protecting the rights of workers and the middle class. Americans elected Clinton based on his FDR-style rhetoric. They were looking forward to a return to the golden age of America's middle class. They were ready for the new covenant, and apparently so was Bill Clinton. There is every sign that he actually believed his own rhetoric. On all this, he won the election in November and spent that month and December preparing his new covenant programs to restore the American middle class. Until January. As Adam Curtis brilliantly points out in a special documentary series he did for the BBC titled The Trap, A few weeks before Bill Clinton was to be sworn into office as President of the United States, he was visited by Goldman Sachs CEO Robert Rubin, who had just taken a $40 million paycheck for his last year with Goldman and would soon become the head of Clinton's economic team tasked with carrying out the new covenant, and with Alan Greenspan. Rubin and Greenspan sat the young new president down and told him the facts of life as they saw them. Clinton would not govern as an FDR liberal. Instead, he must cut government, promote free trade, and reduce regulation of business. Clinton complied and has been richly rewarded. In his second inaugural address, he declared the era of big government is over. The philosophy represented by Rubin and Greenspan doesn't believe in government as a solution to much of anything other than wars and crime. As true classical conservatives in the mold of Sir Edmund Burke and Thomas Hobbes, many modern libertarians and neoliberals don't even believe in democracy. As any libertarian will honestly admit, they call it the tyranny of the majority, or mob rule. Instead, because they believe in the inherently evil nature of most humans, they held that a small ruling elite of good people, the wise ones, must concentrate wealth and power, the first fuels the second by and large, in a small number of hands, out of the reach of what the first American conservative President John Adams called the rabble, us. They believed that social stability was more important than social mobility. As of this writing, the surest way to become wealthy in the United States or Britain is to be born to wealthy parents. The surest way to be poor is to be born to poor parents. Social mobility, the ability to move between classes for better or worse, has been rolled back from its highly fluid levels in the 1940 to 1980 years to a rigidity last measured in the 1920s as America was sliding into the Republican Great Depression. Conservatives, from Sir Edmund Burke's opposition to the Revolutionary War of 1776 to today's opponents of labor rights, believe that too much power and wealth in the hands of the middle class will inevitably lead to instability. Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. Boy, it's Anything Goes Friday, so we'll be picking up your calls on whatever you would like to talk about. There are a few things in the news that I wanted to discuss with you real quickly. Extreme weather events linked to climate change impact on the jet stream. We talked to Michael Mann about this earlier in the week. They just published the research, this out of Penn State University. And this is pretty amazing stuff. Excuse me, it's over on the website at psu.edu. Extreme weather events are occurring more and more often. They went back and looked at things like the 2003 European heat wave, the 2010 Pakistan flood, and the Russian heat wave, the 2011 Texas and Oklahoma heat waves, and the drought, and the 2015 California wildfires. And pointed out that what's happening is that it's not so much like the weather is getting wilder. 100-degree temperatures are not extraordinarily unusual in a lot of these places. What's unusual about them is that they last for more than a few hours or more than one day. It's that they're lasting for 2, 3, 4, 5 days, a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and then when they last that long, they, what would normally be just one hot day turns into a full-blown drought. And what's causing this? It turns out it's caused by global warming. It's caused by the melting of the Arctic. The Arctic is warming faster than the rest of the planet. And as a result of that, the temperature difference between what's called the temperature gradient between the Arctic and the mid-latitudes or the tropics has diminished. And it's that difference in temperature that maintains the power of the jet stream. So the jet stream is getting weaker and weaker, and it just kind of drools down over the North America or Europe or Russia or whatever it may be, and locks into place. And when it locks into place, you get weeks of the same weather, whether it's extreme drought in the west or whether it's extreme rain in the east, which then leads to flooding after, one day of heavy thunderstorms, no big deal. 4 days in a row, you've got flooding. So that's going on. The president, I'm just going to pop through a couple of news stories here. I'll do it at the top of every hour, and then I'll pick up your phone calls on Anything Goes Friday. Mike Pence is now, Donald Trump is doing his sanctions on Turkey thing, and Turkey's currency is collapsing. He's doing this because of this guy, Pastor Brunson. Mike Pence recently said, "To believers across America, I say, pray for Pastor Brunson." Johnny Moore, a member of an evangelical advisory board that counsels Donald Trump, told The Guardian, this is a story by Dimitri Sevastopoulou. Excuse me, this is not The Guardian, this is the Financial Times, FT.com, in an article titled, Donald Trump uses dispute with Turkey to rally evangelicals. This is a cheap political trick, right? This guy, Johnny Moore, he said, in every church in the country, people know the name Andrew Brunson. And he's advising Trump, him and Pence are advising Trump on how to reach out to the Christian vote. They note in the Financial Times, many analysts said Mr. Trump could not win and argued that, this is back in 2016 during the election, and argued that evangelicals, who make up 1/4 of the U.S. population, wouldn't support a liberal real estate mogul with 3 wives and lots of affairs and all this kind of stuff. But Trump took more than 80% of the evangelical vote. Why? Well, because of Mike Pence. Mike Pence is, won't have dinner with a woman who's not his wife if they're sitting alone. He calls his wife mother. He's a good little boy, I guess. Anyhow, this is pretty grim. And Rachel Maddow last night was talking about how, and I think this is actually a huge deal. I was shocked that none of the shows on MSNBC this morning were going back to what she was talking about. And she was asking the question, and I think this is extraordinary. She was asking the question, why is Donald Trump revoking these security clearances? And then she went through the list of everybody on Trump's list that he wants to revoke, right? He started with Brennan. Brennan was the guy, the CIA director, who briefed Trump before he became president in 2016 about how the Russians were trying to get him elected. This was after he won the election, but he was briefed on this by Brennan. Brennan is the first guy, he was fired and now he's lost his security clearance. But everybody else on the list was also essentially in the room. They had knowledge of the collusion between Trump and Russia, or knowledge of the investigation into the collusion between Trump and Russia. And therefore were potential witnesses for Bob Mueller. But to be witnesses, they have to have access to classified information. So if Trump can cut off their access to classified information, they're no longer useful witnesses. Well, he's got pretty much all but one of the people on his list were witnesses and would be called by Mueller. This is Donald Trump trying to shut down Mueller's investigation without taking out Mueller, although there is speculation that the next guy whose security clearance he's going to pull is going to be Bob Mueller's. And if he does that, the investigation is shut down altogether. So some just bizarre stuff. There's a bunch of other things in the news today about China and their military coming after the U.S., new stuff on autism, revising strategy. The Aiden sisters in their Aiden Forecast newsletter are talking about different ways to invest now, given how the world is changing. We'll get to all that in the second and third hour of the program, but right now let's pick up some of your phone calls. Steve in Union Beach, Virginia. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind today?
Hey, how you doing?
Good.
I enjoy your show. It's great.
Thank you.
At one time we used to compromise for the good of the nation, and now we are compromising for the good of the corporation. And this is because of our beloved K Street, which is writing all the bills and putting it on both parties. What's your thought on that?
I completely agree. Jimmy Carter said it on this program 3 or 4 years ago. He said the United States is no longer a functioning democracy. It's become an oligarchy with unlimited political bribery. And that's what Citizens United, it started in 1976 with the Buckley versus Vallejo decision, which said that for billionaires and corporations to give money to politicians, that was an exercise of First Amendment constitutionally protected free speech. The Supreme Court expanded that in a series of decisions. They expanded that to corporations 2 years later in the First National Bank versus Bellotti decision. Then they expanded both of those in 2010, in October of 2010, with the Citizens United decision. And then in 2013, there were still limits on how many politicians you could buy if you were a billionaire. I think the limit was like 130 or something like that. And they just blew up that limit. And they said a billionaire can own an unlimited number of politicians. So, the Koch brothers own basically the entire Republican Party now as a consequence of these decisions.
Right. And how about a little comment about the dummy nonprofit corporations that don't have to tell you that these were set up by. They look like they're like for the environment, but they're actually set up by the Exxon oil companies. And stuff like
the
that.
Exxons and the Kochs. There's all kinds of front organizations, and if you position it as a 501c4, then you can actually engage in political activity and you can support a candidate or attack a candidate. But if you position it, but you have to disclose your donors. If you position it as a 501c3, which is what schools and communities for abused kids and the YMCA are, there's social welfare organizations. If you position it as a 501c3 and only talk about, quote, the issues, you can bring a candidate in. You can say, this so and so is great on this issue, or so. But by implication, you can't explicitly say it, and you don't have to reveal your donors. And then you're absolutely right. They come up with these bizarre names, Friends of the Environment, Workers United with Labor and stuff like that, and they're just, they're nonsense. Good point, Steve. Thank you very much for calling and making it. Margie in Wisconsin Rapids. I'm assuming that's Wisconsin, Margie?
Yes, it is.
It says you want to disagree with me about closed primaries?
Yes. You used Monday, which ironically was the day before I was voting, used the analogy that being a member of a homeowners association and having somebody from outside the homeowners association come in to vote. The better analogy is I belong to a homeowners association, but I'm not allowed to vote because I don't belong to the country club. Understand, in small states or in rural areas, of which I live in primary, but I had to make the decision, do I vote in the Democratic primary so I have a voice in who's the gubernatorial nominee, or do I vote in the Republican primary so I can have a voice in my local elections?
Well, whether you had a closed or an open primary, you'd still have to make that choice. You can only vote in one of the two elections.
But at least in an open primary, I can vote for something. Right now, if Wisconsin was a closed primary, to vote in a local election, I would have to join the Republican Party.
To vote in a primary in a local election.
In a primary in a local election, because there are no Democrats running.
Well, why don't you run for office?
Because I'm an over-the-road truck driver and home about 1 week.
Okay, well, why don't you support somebody who's running for office? Margie, just for the record, let me say, I say this whenever this topic comes up, I'm very ambivalent about closed versus open primaries. I can build a case for either one. And about half our states have open primaries and about half our states have closed primaries. And I don't see a huge difference in the quality or nature of the candidates that are coming out of those different states. With the closed primaries, the argument I was making is if somebody has, really committed their efforts and their lives to this party, then the example I use is when I lived in Michigan back in, I think it was 68, because the Republicans crossed over. We had open primaries in Michigan. Republicans crossed over. There was a huge campaign to do this. My dad was one of the people involved in it. Republicans crossed over and voted in the Democratic primary specifically to vote for George Wallace to embarrass the Democrats. And Michigan actually sent George Wallace to the Democratic party convention in I think it was in Chicago in 68. Yeah, it was, the big riots. And it was horribly embarrassing for the Michigan Democrats. And we didn't have an opportunity to send a good or progressive candidate. We sent George Wallace, for God's sake, because the Republicans all voted for him because we had open primaries. So, on the one hand, I can see how that opens things up for dirty tricks. On the other hand, I'm guessing Democrats can play dirty tricks just as easily as Republicans. And in fact, arguably that's what Claire McCaskill did, in promoting her opponents in the last two elections in Missouri. So, whether it's open or closed, they have their own unique problems. I'm not in favor specifically of one or the other. So just for the record. Margie, thanks for the call. We'll be back. It is 18 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. It's Anything Goes Friday. We'll be taking your calls right after this. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with more of your calls in just a moment. 18 minutes past the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. Fair and only slightly unbalanced. And welcome back. Jason in Vancouver, Washington. Hey, Jason, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
How's it going, Tom?
Great.
I just was listening to the Majority Report, and they had someone on that said Denmark was more capital. They had some study that said that Denmark was more capitalist than the United States and least corrupt with the big. So it's basically because the Republicans say the big government will lead to corruption, but the Denmark's, they got a big government and it's the least corrupt. So it's just kind of
and capitalism works better there because it's well regulated.
And it's amazing, and I just wish the United States would catch up in that area.
Yeah.
I wondered your opinion on whether or not you thought that state banks or the post office becoming a bank is something that might happen in the next decade, or if you thought that was a good idea or not.
I think both are quite likely. California has been flirting with this for some time, but there are some communities. In fact, we had a guest on talking about this a couple weeks ago. I'm sorry, I don't remember which state it was. But there is an effort. There are efforts actually in several states, and there are also efforts at the county and city level to create, state chartered banks, nonprofit banks, so that those municipalities, those banks. I think San Francisco's been talking about this, that they can create their own bank, and instead of having to, send billions of dollars to Citibank or Chase or Wells Fargo every month, or millions of dollars in profits for those banks. They can take that profit that would normally be made on banking and use it to fund their own city and their own efforts. That's a really good thing, and I think that more of that is going to happen. What was your other question? I'm sorry, the banks and what else?
Oh, the first thing was just a comment on Denmark, because I thought it was really neat. And
yeah.
I really, I love this country. I love the Northwest, and I can't wait for this country to become more, have that social safety net.
Yeah.
But I'm a big fan of Henry Wallace, FDR's first vice president. And thanks, Tom, and I hope you have a good day.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jason. Henry Wallace was a hell of a guy. Let's see here. Irwin in Missoula, Montana. Hey, Irwin, what's up?
Hello, Tom. Yes, I called a couple of weeks ago. I was looking at greenhouse gas production per capita, and you asked about different countries. Now, I gave a figure last time of about 3,000, looking at the whole globe, and the units were wrong. I was looking at an EPA study that's out since the new administration, and the units were confusing. They were in carbon. They weren't in carbon dioxide, so it was about 3 times higher than that. I looked at Smithsonian, an article in that, and used their figures from the World Bank, and here is what I came up with. China, and this is from 2012, China is about 19,000 pounds per person. The U.S. is about 43,000 pounds per person.
Per year.
The EU is about 20,000 pounds per person. India is about 5,000 pounds per person. Russia is the same as us, about 43,000. Japan's about 25,000. Canada had the highest at about 61,000. Brazil is about 31,000.
Fascinating stuff. Erwin, I'm sorry we're hitting a break here, but thank you. Thank you for sharing your research with us. It sounds like, we've got a long way to go. That Russia and the United States are right up there at the top of the carbon pollution thing. I'm sure we're both working on it. Thank you so much for watching the Thom Hartmann Program, our program here on Free Speech TV. We really appreciate it. The main way that we support our program, that all of us who work here get our paychecks and that we keep the lights on and whatnot here. Free Speech TV does that by asking you to donate, a couple times a year, and that keeps Free Speech TV alive. We keep our show alive principally, mostly, by advertising. We have advertisers who pay the bills. They support the program. And we've told you about some of them in the past, but really want to just move all that onto the internet. So if you would like to support our program by supporting our underwriters, our advertisers, you can go to thomhartmann.com. There's a complete list of them, or there will be soon. and just, you know, click on their little ads and find out what they have and be there for them and for us. Thank you so much. Shabbat Shalom, TGIF. Juma Mubarak is the Muslim greeting for Happy Friday, or you know whatever it literally means. Linda in Chicago. Hey, Linda. Thanks for listening on Chicago's Progressive Talk. What's up?
Well, I want to ask you a question. Is why hasn't David Duke and other Nazi leaders here in the U.S. who were born here or not born here have their citizenship taken away? Even their natural citizenship can be taken away under the Section 3 little paragraph. And I just want to know why something has never been done to stop this. I can't stand this divide in this country of black, white, Asian, all of it. It wasn't brought up this way.
I get what you're saying, Linda, but the thing that we need to remember, the lesson that we need to constantly remember is anything the government does to our enemies, it can do to us. And so if we were to change U.S. policy, I mean, stripping somebody of their citizenship is effectively a form of banishment. It's one of the most, short of being executed for treason, probably the most severe punishment that can be meted out to anybody short of imprisonment. And, it's a really, really radical step. And there are people, Donald Trump and his buddies probably think that I'm worse than David Duke. And if we were to start taking away people's citizenship because we disagree with their politics, you and I might be next on the list, Linda.
I understand that. But it's like this hatred that this man has caused over the years.
Yeah.
And feeding ignorant people who don't want to read or look into, it's just so heartbreaking.
I absolutely agree, Linda. I absolutely agree. And the thing to do about it is to inform people, to wake people up. Linda, thank you for the call. I get how frustrated you are, and I share your frustration. But John in Jacksonville, Ohio. Hey, John, thanks for listening to Sirius XM. What's up?
Hey, Tom, I just have a comment and a question real quick. My comment is...
John, I just realized I've got 15 seconds until we're going to hit a break. I'm going to put you on hold rather than let you get that out and only give you 15 seconds so that we can actually talk about it. So hang on just a minute. We'll pick up your call on the other side of the break. My apologies. It's 27 minutes past the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, broadcasting live from Portland, Oregon. It's Anything Goes Friday, taking your calls on whatever topic you may like. Or want to discuss about or talk about. It's the home of the political revolution, the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around. We'll be right back with more of your calls on Anything Goes Friday.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Defending America from the weapons of mass deception. Thom Hartmann here with you. Today we're reading from Behold America by Sarah Churchwell, The Entangled History of America First and the American Dream. This is from the prologue. On Monday, 30 May 1927, a cool day with showers forecast, New Yorkers were gathering for the annual Memorial Day parades around the city. It was only 9 years since the end of the European War, into which America had been so reluctantly drawn and Europe had suddenly become closer than ever before. Precisely 10 days earlier, Charles Lindbergh had completed the first solo flight across the Atlantic in the spirit of St. Louis, and no one had yet stopped celebrating. Front pages around the country reported that Lucky Lindy had been mobbed in London, greeted by rapturous crowds of 150,000. Few Americans were talking about much else than the newest national hero, but in New York that day, different kinds of mobs were about to gather. Around 8 a.m., a group of Italian immigrants living in the Bronx set out for for the elevated train on their way to Manhattan to join the parade. But they were not going to honor the American soldiers who had died in the service of their country. They were supporters of Mussolini, planning to join 400 American fascists who were marching in Manhattan's Memorial Day parade as part of the official fascist movement in the United States. They had been invited by the parade's organizers, to the outrage of many anti-fascists, including Italian nationalists and anarchists who threatened violence if the invitation wasn't rescinded. It wasn't. Like all his fellow fascists intending to march that day, Joseph Carisi was wearing the black shirt uniform, sporting leather boots, jodhpurs, a black cap, and carrying a steel-tipped riding crop. When he stopped to buy a newspaper, Carisi was jumped by two men, stabbed in the neck, and left to die on the sidewalk. Another fascist, Nicholas Amoroso, who was running either to catch up with his group or away from the killers, reports vary, was shot 4 times, once right through the heart. One of the 2 murdered men had served in the American Army during the Great War, the other with the Italian Army, papers reported. The parade they had meant to join took place without them, a fascist delegation of several hundred that was guarded by police to, quote, avert disorder. After the parade, the American blackshirts returned to their headquarters in the heart of Times Square. There, another of the fascists standing outside was set upon by 3 men. He defended himself with his riding crop as his fellow blackshirts charged out, brandishing clubs and whips, chasing the assailant through the theater traffic in Times Square, who fled as the black-shirted mob tore through the traffic. 100 fascists, reported the New York Times, rushed the attackers. A melee ensued that was quickly dispersed by the police. There was also violence in Brooklyn, where a parade of fascisti marched from the Angelo Rizza Fascista League at 274 Troutman Street in Bushwick. The LA Times reported several hundred men were parading, including 40 or 50 in the black shirt uniform. Fights broke out between supporters and protesters mingling on the sidewalks, and an anti-fascist was found lying on the ground, stabbed in the back. He survived and identified a fascist as his assailant. Accompanied by 30 police reserves to forestall violence, the marchers made their way through Brooklyn, stopping at the Wilson Avenue station, where the fascisti came to attention and gave the fascist salute. They ended at a Roman Catholic church, where the priest blessed them under large American and Italian flags, while the police remained on guard. The biggest outbreak of violence that Memorial Day, however, occurred in Queens, where it centered around a different right-wing group, not Italian Americans, but the self-proclaimed 100% American kind. By 1927, the Ku Klux Klan had spread across the United States since its rebirth in Georgia 12 years earlier. The first Klan was formed in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War, as former Confederate soldiers in Tennessee created a secret society to promote white supremacism, and terrorize the newly freed slaves in the South during the Reconstruction era. The name is generally believed to have originated from the Greek word for circle, kuklos, while Klan pays homage to the mystified Celtic heritage supposedly shared by white Southerners. Within a decade or two, the first Klan had been successfully suppressed by law enforcement and died out by the turn of the century. But in 1915, it was resuscitated in Georgia, and by the early 1920s, the second Klan had achieved a powerful political presence in the United States, not only in the South, but across the country. I would add this is because of 1915, the movie Birth of a Nation came out. The Klan had an active presence in New York City and Long Island by 1927, with favorite slogans, which they even attempted to copyright at various points. That year, the Klan was calling attention to the fact that it first announced the program of 100% Americanism and of America First. They were not, in fact, the first to adopt these mottos, as this book will show. In 1927, both phrases had been around for a decade or more. But as far as the Klan busily copywriting hate was concerned, America First belonged to them. And on Memorial Day in Queens, 1,000 or so of them had gathered to march, many in white robes and hoods. They were accompanied by 400 women from the so-called Clavana, the feminine branch of the Klan. Some of the reported 20,000 spectators in Queens that day objected to the Klan's presence, as others defended their right to march. Scuffles broke out, and it turned into a riot. Women fought women, and spectators fought the policemen and the Klansmen as their desire dictated, said a newspaper. Klan banners were shredded, and 5 of their number were arrested, said initial reports, while a few others were caught up in the confusion as well. The book, Behold America, Sarah Churchwell. here with you, helping you win the water cooler wars, and welcome back. John in Jacksonville, Ohio. You're the guy that we were talking to just before the break, right?
Yes.
Or not? Yes. Okay, cool.
Okay, I just have a quick comment and then a question. My comment is you made a statement the other day about we've got to not fall for this stuff, and we cannot have a circular firing squad, and we've got to get behind people because you're never going to have a perfect candidate. And
Right.
I so agree with that, and I love that we need to repeat that often and often. You know, it's a big deal.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm reading a book called The Body Keeps the Score, and it's about trauma and PTSD and stuff like that. And in the book, it describes how some people they withdraw into a shell and you can't penetrate them and stuff like that. And I'm wondering if there's a correlation between that and a certain amount of our population that's been traumatized for various reasons.
Yeah, there is a correlation, and there's another correlation that I think is really worth noting, and that is that when pregnant mothers are exposed to high levels of stress, their body produces a hormone called cortisol, which evokes the flight or fight response, jacks up adrenaline, suppresses blood flow, peripheral blood flow, and things like that. And that hormone seems to cause developing fetuses to develop a stronger, a larger, more robust and resilient hindbrain, that is the brain stem, the lower brain functions, the fight or flight responses, and less development in the forebrain, the part of our brain that controls both intellect, the level of our intellect, and our ability to inhibit our behaviors, self-control, self-regulation. So basically what happens is when pregnant mothers are stressed, they produce babies who become people who are more violent, more reactive, and more physical. And when mothers are not stressed, they produce babies who are more intellectual, more thoughtful, more reflective, and less physical and less likely to use violence. I think that as a metaphor for how we all are throughout our lives, the more stressed we feel, the more we tend to fall into those patterns, and the less stressed we are, the more we tend to enjoy life and be happy and live like people do in Denmark. Make sense, John?
Yeah, I think that explains why with some of these Republicans that I talk to, you can't get through to them.
Yeah.
There's no getting through to them. It's not going to happen.
Well, part of it is that the Republican Party has appealed to their fear and to their sense of being under siege. And when Democrats come along and say, "Oh, that's not real," their response is, "I know it's real. I feel it." So you can't get through to them on that level. And then the other part of it is that they've been thoroughly brainwashed by hardcore right-wing hate radio and by hardcore lies coming out of Fox so-called news and all their blonde commentators and reporters. So it's kind of a double whammy. But yeah, John, I think you've nailed it. Thanks for the call. Good to hear from you. McWayne in Chino Valley, Arkansas. Hey, McWayne, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, Tom, Arizona, but
Arizona. I'm sorry. That's AZ.
Yes.
Thank you.
I wanted to start with an apology. The last time we spoke, I was highly critical of the apartheid state of Israel, and although I meant it as a critique of the government, I think you took it as a critique of the people, and for that I'm sorry. I certainly wasn't my intent.
I am concerned, particularly with this latest thing, to say that basically, if you're not Jewish, you're not a citizen of Israel. I mean, they haven't literally and legally said that, but it's damn close. They're moving in that direction, and that concerns me tremendously. I've seen, articles published in both The Guardian and Haaretz saying, "Wait a minute, this isn't the Israel that we know and love." I'm very concerned about that.
Indeed. But today, I just wanted to say we've added another layer of bewilderment. Aretha, a beautiful black woman, has died, but hate and racism in the form of Trump and his minions lives on. But I always must qualify my despair with something Gandhi said, and I truly believe love triumphs always, and albeit imperceptibly. I believe it is today, Tom.
I agree, and that's why we need to view our friends, neighbors, relatives, colleagues who are politically different from us with compassion and understanding, And belittling them really doesn't do that much good. McWayne, well said. Thank you very much for the call. Rob in Melbourne, Florida. Hey, Rob, what's on your mind? Thanks for watching us on Facebook Live.
Yes, Tom. I'm curious. I don't want to go into a screed to explain my. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just fine.
Oh, okay, cool. I tried to make this concise because I didn't want to take up too much of your time. My question, I guess, is more of a question/statement. I was curious if you believe that the GOP is not feckless, but is actually fully aware of the damage being done to the separation of powers.
Oh yeah, absolutely. This is an end stage capitalism / oligarchy power play that's going on right now. And you see it in a whole bunch of different dimensions. You see it in all the voter suppression efforts. You see it in the massive amount of money that the hardcore right-wing oligarchs who are in favor of oligarchy are bringing into the political process. You see it in the kinds of judges that they're stacking the courts with. The most recent is this bozo that Trump wants to put on the Supreme Court. I mean, all of these things, Brett Kavanaugh, all of these things should scare the hell out of us. And not to say that I'm in favor of using fear politically. Let me rephrase that. All of these things should concern us greatly, and we need to do something about them.
Well, my kind of theory on this is that the Supreme Court, maybe not in totality, but the ones who are obviously creative partisans have been actually in on this.
Oh yeah, yeah. This is what the Federalist Society was created to do.
You know, in their meetings they attend, like for instance, the one Scalia died in, I believe, was a similar such thing that he ended up passing away at one of these kinds of meetings.
Yeah, he was on vacation with a bunch of right wingers. Yeah, there is no doubt about it. They are attempting to turn America into something that none of the founders would have recognized, and FDR wouldn't recognize, and LBJ wouldn't recognize. They're trying to turn us into a theocratic oligarchy.
So kind of we can't vote these people out under normal circumstances if
they're trying to prevent us from voting them out. It's why like in Georgia they're trying to shut down. There's one county in Georgia, we talked about it yesterday, I think it was Franklin County, that is majority black county. They're trying to take them from nine voting districts down to 2. They're shutting down voting in all black areas. They've been closing. This was in the Carolinas was done 2 years ago. After they passed their ID law, they shut down the DMV offices except for 2 days a week and restricted their hours so that working people would 100% have to go, not on the weekends when they typically can, but they would have to take time off work. They'd have to go Monday through Friday, and the lines will be longer, so they'd have to wait for 4 or 5 hours to get their driver's license, all designed to prevent low-income people who can't easily take off from work from registering to vote, whereas high-income people on salaries who can easily take off an afternoon from work, they can go out and register if necessary.
Can I ask if this seems hyperbolic to you? I keep getting this image in my mind of what's coming, and it's not like the scary stuff from the black and white reels when it was clear, but it's like that's sort of the trains run on time, but it's with internet and cell phones where people don't even realize it's happening under their noses.
Yeah, well, that's largely happening already. Our news is sanitized. We don't hear about we don't hear a critique of the military-industrial complex ever. We don't hear about the problems with net neutrality and how Ajit Pai has lied to Congress and lied to all of us in an effort to turn the internet over to his paymasters. It goes on and on. It's global climate change is pretty much not ever mentioned on the air. These are all things, and at the same time, when we watch these television networks, we see hundreds of millions of dollars being spent on advertising for fossil fuel extraction, for the pharmaceutical industry, which has never taken on. Why is it that in the United States, when I used to live in Montpelier, Vermont, Bernie was organizing buses every Saturday in Montpelier. They drive up to, across the border into Montreal for them to buy their medications. Why? Because you can't call a Montreal pharmacy and say, would you please ship it to me? It's against the law. Why is that law in place? Why is it that we pay more than twice as much for pharmaceuticals than any other country in the world, and our government is keeping it that way? Well, obviously, it's because our government has been bought and paid for by the drug industry, among others. And our media doesn't want to call them out because they're one of the largest single sources of revenue for our media. I mean, this is a.
They're paid to not ask those questions.
Yeah, it's like a dog chasing its tail. I mean, it's a complete catch-22. And to break this hold on American democracy, and frankly our media to a large extent, that is being held by these giant monolithic industries like the pharmaceutical industry. We have to get money out of politics. And, back in 71 and 73, after the Nixon scandals and during some of them in 73, we passed really strong, comprehensive reform of our electoral system of money in politics. And, of course, that was taken down in 1976 by the Supreme Court. They said, we're going to blow up these laws. We don't like them, and they're principally used to fund Republicans, so we're going to do away with them. Yeah, spot on, Rob. Thanks a lot for the call. Very well said. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's your media support group for We the People, the Thom Hartmann Program. Back with more of your calls on Anything Goes Friday right after this. And welcome back. Oh, let's see here who is listening on Free Speech TV. There we go. Robert in Nashville, Tennessee. Hey, Robert, what's on your mind today?
Tom, how are you?
I am well, thank you. Great, but I'll get better, Robert. What's on your mind?
I wanted to get your thoughts on the latest scandal involving the Catholic Church, which I consider to be, and have long considered to be, more or less a criminal enterprise. Not the entire church, but the scandals that keep coming up, Tom. Your thoughts as to how this church can be brought down, I guess, is what I would ask.
Well, I would say,
how does this continue? Year after year after year, these things brought to light. And this latest thing of thousands of people being involved, abused in just the state of Pennsylvania, and just the one investigation in that state.
Yeah, I think what Pennsylvania has shown us is that probably if you scratch the history of the Catholic, this is a 20 or 30-year study that was done. If you look at that kind of a chunk of history in the Catholic Church of pretty much any city in the world, you're going to probably find the same thing. And I would argue that in third world countries where there's less government oversight and fewer, less strong laws against this kind of stuff, it's probably even worse. I think from the political point of view, from the, we're the government of the United States, or we elect the government of the United States. Step one is to take away the tax exemption from all churches. I don't see why churches are tax exempt. Why am I subsidizing churches? Why am I paying for their police and fire and roads? And I don't get it. There's no good reason for that. And you've got people, Jerry Falwell Jr., a multimillionaire, Billy Graham's son, Franklin Graham, a multimillionaire. Pat Robertson sold his empire for $1 billion, a billionaire. I mean, these guys are getting rich, and we are subsidizing them. And, of course, the Catholic Church is number one. And then, secondly, if I was inside the Catholic Church, and I'm not, so it's easy for me to stand on the outside and throw stones, I suppose. But if I was inside the Catholic Church, I would be saying it's time to end celibacy, and it's time to end the male-only priesthood. And this is what the Church of England did, several decades ago? They did it in my lifetime. It seems like it was 40 years ago or thereabouts. They said that priests can marry. And it just makes sense that if you have a priesthood that is entirely male and purports to be entirely celibate, you are going against biology. It's just that simple. And you're going to attract, shall we say, very strange people. Obviously not all of them. Many of the Catholic priests, I'm sure, are not to sound too much like Donald Trump, but are very fine people who are there because it's part of their spiritual search. And in fact, I know some of those people, and have known them over the years. But on the other hand, it's also open season for the kind of people who are indicted in these criminal complaints. So I would think that the church, if they want to clean up their act, they should end the doctrine of celibacy and allow women to become priests, just like the Episcopals have done. And It's amazing the power of bringing women into the power structure. I mean, we're starting to see this now with our political things, our political structures. As more and more women are running for political office, we've seen it in corporate boardrooms. Those corporations that have more women on the board of directors are more likely to be making good and rational decisions than those that are all male. It's time for us to wake up to this reality. Thank you so much for watching the Thom Hartmann program, our program here on Free Speech TV. We really appreciate it. The main way that we support our program, that all of us who work here get our paychecks and that we keep the lights on and whatnot here, Free Speech TV does that by asking you to donate, a couple times a year, and that keeps Free Speech TV alive. We keep our show alive principally, mostly, by advertising. We have advertisers who pay the bills. They support the program. And we've told you about some of them in the past, but really want to just move all that onto the internet. So if you would like to support our program by supporting our underwriters, our advertisers, you can go to thomhartmann.com. There's a complete list of them, or there will be soon, and just click on their little ads and find out what they have and be there for them and for us. Thank you so much.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And it's Anything Goes Friday, picking up your calls. Erica in Baltimore, Maryland. Hey, Erica. Thanks for listening to Sirius XM. What's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Good to speak to you.
Thank you. Back at you.
I just wanted to ask your opinion on...
Oop. Erica, you just faded out. Can you repeat what you said? Your phone just went away for a minute.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I was wondering your thoughts on the zero waste movement.
On the zero waste movement, Eric, you just vanished again.
Oh, do you hear me now?
I do. Try it one more time, and then we'll have to try it another time.
The truck's near me.
The zero waste movement.
So I was. Oh, go ahead.
You said you want my thoughts on the zero waste movement. Then you said something after that which vanished.
Yes. Do you think it's feasible? I kind of tend to go by the rule if it's not feasible for those who are low income, that it's not really a feasible solution for everybody.
Right.
It does seem to be a good movement. It's got a lot of good initiatives, but I was just wondering your thoughts.
I don't know that much about it, frankly. I mean, do
you mind if I tell you a little bit
about it?
Go for it.
Go for it. If your phone holds up, yeah.
So the zero waste movement basically centers around, eliminating plastics, buying mostly bulk.
Buying things in bulk, buying things that are recyclable. Your phone just vanished for a minute again, Erica.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You're gone again. I'll tell you, Erica. I'm sorry. We can't do this with your phone going away every few seconds. But I think that it's a laudable thing. I'm all in favor of zero waste. Whether it is practical is something that low-income people may not have access to the same resources that higher-income people would have in order to live a zero-waste lifestyle. And right now, some of these biodegradable plastics and whatnot are more expensive than the cheaper plastics, and you can't find them in a lot of neighborhoods and a lot of communities. That said, I think we need to improve the quality of the food and packaging that is available in those communities. But the other point that I would make, Erica, is that human beings are the only life form on Earth who produce waste that isn't the food for another life form on Earth. Literally every other living thing's waste is somebody else's food. Trees, their waste is carbon dioxide. Animals inhale carbon dioxide. Animals, by and large, their waste joins the soil and becomes nitrogen fertilizer for the trees and carbon dioxide that's exhaled. We need to look at nature and say, okay, how do we create a system for life on the planet for human beings where our waste can be the food for other things, and then introduce that back into the biological cycles in ways that's non-destructive. I mean, in some of our waste that is food for other things is being massively destructive. Our farm runoff and our sugar runoff down in Florida is feeding these red tides and these algal blooms that are killing animal life in the seas. So we need to look at, okay, which waste are we going to produce? How is it going to get reintroduced into the environment? But I think the goal of all of this is brilliant. Erica, thank you for the call. it is an important issue. Craig in Rockford, Illinois. Hey, Craig, thanks for listening to 92.5 FM. What's up?
You bet, Tom. I had just heard the other day about about Bob Kennedy suing Monsanto.
Yeah, and winning.
Yeah, but didn't the government here just a while back, wasn't it in one of the bills that you can't sue Monsanto?
Not to the best of my knowledge. I mean, they just did it.
Yeah. Well, I thought that was something that I
think what you're referring to is the decision. There was both a U.S. government decision and a European Union decision not to classify glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup, Monsanto's big product, not to classify it as a known human carcinogen. And this lawsuit in California is, if it sets a strong precedent, I mean, it may well be overturned. Monsanto is certainly appealing it, or Bayer now owns Monsanto. But if this lawsuit stands, and if it stands up under appeal, then Monsanto's got a serious problem.
Okay, that's what I was calling in about.
Okay, thanks a lot, Craig.
Thank you.
Good to hear from you. Let's see here, 5550. Oh, we've got a couple of minutes here. Larry in Soyafet, New York. Am I saying that right, Larry?
Syosset, pretty close.
Okay.
Whenever I listen to your show, I'm always learning something, and it's amazing. So I'm calling you up to ask you a question on terms between liberal and progressive. I think over the years you've referred to yourself as a progressive versus a liberal.
Yeah.
What's the difference between the two?
Well, Bernie talked about this some years ago on this show, and he said that the liberals are kind of the old-fashioned labor movement, and that's not always aligned with progressive values. Large chunks of the labor movement, for example, supported the Keystone XL pipeline because it would create jobs for them. His point was that progressives tend to have a larger worldview. They are looking at equality of people, although liberals historically shared many of these. To a large extent, Larry, the two terms are interchangeable, and historically have been. And a lot of people started using the word progressive after Rush Limbaugh made the word liberal radioactive back in the 80s and 90s. But, I'm perfectly willing to embrace either one. Bernie has made those distinctions on this program in the past, but I'm not sure I know exactly the details of how he views them. But I think whether we call ourselves liberals, progressives, or democratic socialists, for that matter, which is a term that seems to make the media's heads explode, but I would gladly call myself a democratic socialist too. In the proud and fine tradition of Franklin Roosevelt and Lyndon Johnson, and Jack Kennedy, for that matter. And Harry Truman, a lot of great Democratic presidents who were actually also democratic socialists and progressives and liberals. So, here we are. It's Anything Goes Friday, back with more of your calls. It's a guest-free day today. It's just you and me, so we've got a lot we can talk about. Stick around. We'll be right back. The Thom Hartmann Program, the place where smart people get their news.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Thank you so much for watching the Thom Hartmann Program, our program here on Free Speech TV. We really appreciate it. The main way that we support our program, that all of us who work here get our paychecks and that we keep the lights on and whatnot here. Free Speech TV does that by asking you to donate, a couple times a year, and you know, that keeps Free Speech TV alive. We keep our show alive principally, mostly, by advertising. We have advertisers who, you know, pay the bills. They support the program. And we've told you about some of them in the past, but really want to just move all that onto the internet. So if you would like to support our program by supporting our underwriters, our advertisers, you can go to thomhartmann.com. There's a complete list of them, or there will be soon, and just, you know, click on their little ads and find out what they have, and be there for them and for us. Thank you so much. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study by Stefano Harney and Fred Moten. This is from the introduction. It starts with love, exchange, fellowship. It ends as it begins, in motion, in between various modes of being and belonging, and on the way to new economies of giving, taking, being with and for. And it ends with a ride in a Buick Skylark on a way to another place altogether. Surprising, perhaps, after we have engaged dispossession, debt, dislocation, and violence, but not surprising when you have understood that the projects of fugitive planning and black study are mostly about reaching out to find connection. They are about making common cause with the brokenness of being, a brokenness, I would venture to say, that is also blackness, that remains blackness, and will, despite all, remain broken, because this book is not a prescription for repair. If we do not seek to fix what has been broken, then what? How do we resolve to live with brokenness, with being broke, which is also what Moten and Harney called debt? Well, given that debt is sometimes a history of giving, at other times a history of taking, at all times a history of capitalism, and given that debt also signifies a promise of ownership but never delivers on that promise, we have to understand that debt is something that cannot be paid off. Debt, as Harney puts it, presumes a kind of individualized realization to a naturalized economy that is predicated upon exploitation. Can we have, he asks, another sense of what is owed that does not presume a nexus of activities like recognition and acknowledgement, payment and gratitude? Can debt become a principle of elaboration? Moten links economic debt to the brokenness of being in the interview with Stefan Shukatis, who he acknowledges that some debts should be paid and that much is owed, especially to black people, by white people. And yet he says, I also know that it is, that what it is that is supposed to be repaired is irreparable. It can't be repaired. The only thing we can do is tear this stuff down completely and build something new, end of quote. The Undercommons do not come to pay their debts, to repair what has been broken, to fix what has been undone. If you want to know what the Undercommons wants, what Moten and Harney want, what black people, indigenous people, queers, and poor people want, what we, the we who cohabit in the space of the Undercommons, want, it is this. We cannot be satisfied with the recognition and acknowledgement generated by the very system that denies A, that anything was ever broken, and B, that we deserve to be the broken part. So we refuse to ask for recognition, and instead we want to take apart, dismantle, tear down that structure right now. That right now limits our ability to find each other, to see beyond it, and to access the places that we know live outside its walls. We cannot say what new structures will replace the ones we live with yet, because once we have torn stuff down, we will inevitably see more and see differently and feel a new sense of wanting and being and becoming. What we want after the break will be different from what we think we want before the break, and both are necessarily different from the desires that issue from being in the dark. Let's come at this by another path. In the melancholic and visionary 2009 film version of Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are, 1963, Max, the small seeker who leaves his room, his home, his family to find the world beyond, finds a world of lost and lonely beasts, and they promptly make him their king. Max is the first king the wild things have had, whom they did not eat, and who did not, in turn, try to eat them. And the beasts are the first grown things that Max has met, who want his opinion, his judgment, and his rule. Max's power is that he is small while they are big. He promises the beasts that he has no plans to eat them, and that this is more than anyone has ever promised them. He promises them that he will find ways through and around and will slip through the cracks and re-crack the cracks if they fill up. He promises to keep sadness at bay and to make the world with the wild creatures that roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws. That Max fails to make the wild things happy or to save them or to make the world with them is less important than the fact that he found them and he recognized in them the end of something and potentially the path to an alternative in his world, or an alternative to his world, excuse me. The wild things were not the utopian creatures of fairy tales. They were the rejected and lost subjects of the world Max had left behind. And because he shuttles between the Oedipal land where his mother rules and the ruined world of the wild, he knows the parameters of the real. He sees what is included and what is left out. And he is now able to set sail for another place, a place that is neither the home he left nor the home to which he wants to return. Moten and Harney want to gesture to another place, a wild place that is not simply the leftover space that limbs real and regulated zones of polite society. Rather, it is a wild place that continuously produces its own unregulated wilderness. The zone we enter through Moten and Harney is ongoing and exists in the present, and as Harney puts it, some kind of demand is already being enacted, fulfilled in the call itself. While describing the riots of London in 2011, Harney suggests that the riots and insurrections do not separate out the request, the demand, and the call. Rather, they enact the one in the other. The book is The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you live from Portland, Oregon. And just a few things in the news, and then I'll pick up your phone calls for Anything Goes Friday. A judge, Arlene Bluth is the judge's name, New York State Supreme Court, ruled today, apparently, maybe it was late yesterday afternoon. Yeah, it was late yesterday afternoon, that the non-disclosure agreements that Donald Trump is having people sign when they work in the White House or when they worked on his campaign, which is the one is the focus of this particular one, which are all apparently slightly rewritten variations on the NDAs he's had people sign for years with the Trump organization, that these are not legal, that they're written very clumsily and they're written in a way that basically doesn't work. The judge said that Jessica Denson, who worked on the Trump campaign in the 2016, leading up to the 2016 election, and sued Trump or the Trump campaign for harassment and sexual discrimination, she said she was, quote, subjected to severe and pervasive slander, aggravated harassment, attempted theft, cyberbullying, and sexual discrimination and sexual harassment at the hands of staffers, including Camilo Sandoval, who was then her supervisor in the campaign and is now the chief information officer for Donald Trump's Veterans Administration. She was asking for $25 million for this. The Trump campaign responded by suing her for $1.5 million for violating the non-disclosure agreement by saying that she was sexually harassed on the campaign. And the judge threw that out. They threw out the $1.5 million countersuit and is allowing her suit to go forward. She says that due to various wording errors, this from TalkingPointsMemo.com today, by Kate Riga, due to various wording efforts and incorrect phrasing in the non-disclosure agreement, it did not prevent her from taking her case public. And then they note this could have far-ranging effects. For example, Trump is going after Omarosa right now as we speak, based on that non-disclosure agreement. I mentioned investment strategies. The Aiden forecast just came out. And they are underwriters of our program, by the way, just FYI. But it's a great little investment newsletter. They have a weekly update and then a monthly 8-page, or maybe this is 10 or 12 pages, newsletter, plus a little daily thing called the Daily Fennec that comes up. And the Aiden forecast is saying, we had the sisters, Marianne and Pamela, on the program a while ago, and they were saying, probably time to get out of the stock market and maybe even get into euros. Well, now they're saying get out of euros. They've been going down for some time and they're going to continue to go down. So basically cut your losses and get out of euros. and get back into the stock market. And specifically the NASDAQ. They're suggesting QQQ, which is buying the entire NASDAQ, Amazon, Apple, some of these tech stocks. There's a growing, I think, belief in the investment community that they actually talk about it in their newsletter this week or this month, that there are basically three phases to a bubble, to a boom, and they don't use the word bubble, but I would. Three phases to a boom, the stopping the hemorrhaging phase, then the slow and steady growth phase, and then the third phase is everybody wants to get in on it because, oh my God, look at how fast it's going up. And the last two times this happened, in 2007 and in 1998, we saw as much as 100% increase in the value of the stock market in the last year. And they're thinking that might be what's going on now as a result of all this money that Trump poured into the economy by borrowing $1.5 trillion and giving it to his billionaire buddies in the big corporations. So, for what it's worth, they're saying 30% of your portfolio should be in those stocks, which is pretty amazing stuff. I listened to them carefully. China is rapidly expanding their bomber training, probably for U.S. strikes, according to the Pentagon. The Pentagon, these are the kind of warnings we were getting about the Japanese military and the German military in the early 1930s. That actually it started in 1928 in Japan, this massive military buildup, which led to their invasion of China, and I think it was 31 or 32. And, China or Japan had been this very aggressive military power for a number of years before, they dragged us into the war by bombing us at Pearl Harbor in 41. But they had been at war for almost a decade at that point. The Germans were a little later to the party. They started it all with the annexing of the Sudetenland of Austria, the border with Austria, the border regions with Austria in, as I recall, late 36 or early 37, and then of course the invasion of Poland in 1937, which really kicked off, the invasion of Europe. But is China going that same route? Are they going down this same road? Are they hyper-militarizing? It looks like it. This is from the Pentagon report. Over the last 3 years, the People's Liberation Army, the Chinese military, has rapidly expanded its overwater bombing operation areas, gaining experience in critical maritime regions and likely training for strikes against the United States and allied targets, which would presumably be, South Korea, Taiwan, Japan. In January, the Pentagon put countering Beijing, along with Russia, at the center of a new national defense strategy. This from a piece in The Guardian. And in May, the Pentagon withdrew an invitation to China to join a multinational naval exercise, and China's space program is exploding right now. They're spending a fortune on their military. Another story, this is kind of falls into our geeky science category. They just did a study in Finland. Finland, going all the way back to 1983, had been pulling blood from pregnant women and storing it, just keeping it for future studies. And no other country has been doing this. So this was published this week in the American Journal of Psychiatry. And they were wondering if there was an association between polychlorinated biphenyls, PCBs, these chemicals that used to be used as coolants in transformers that are now banned in industrial countries but are very persistent in the atmosphere and in the environment, in the soil and whatnot. Whether these PCBs, which are known to cause cancer, whether they also caused autism. So they pulled out the blood from literally over 1 million pregnant mothers from 1983 to today, and up to 2005, and looked at their blood and then compared that with the records of the birth of their children. How did their children turn out? And thus why it went to 2005. So you could get the first, roughly 10 or more years of the child's development, so you could see if they developed cancer. They were looking for cancer in PCBs. They didn't find cancer, but what they did find, and shocked them, was a clear statistical correlation between the amount of DDT the women had in their bloodstream and whether their child was autistic. This is pretty shocking stuff. Alan Brown, a psychiatrist and epidemiologist at Columbia University in New York, turned to a biological database in Finland. He compared the children's health records throughout this period in time. And here's the actual study, the study's conclusions. Mothers with high concentrations of DDT in their bloodstream were 32%, this is the top quartile, the top fourth of them, so they're the highest levels of this chemical. They were 32% more likely than women with lower levels of DDT to give birth to children who developed autism. The likelihood that a child with autism accompanied by intellectual disability was twice as high in mothers with elevated DDT levels compared to those with lower levels. They say they don't know the mechanism. It's unclear how this works, but DDT has been shown to cause low-weight birth and premature birth, which are known risk factors for autism. The bigger one that they're concerned about is that DDT is also known to bind to proteins in the body called androgen receptors. These are the receptor cells. They're the parts of the body that bond with testosterone, by and large, the principal androgen. These are the male sex hormones, and you know, produce the results that those hormones are supposed to produce. You bind them up. Well, here's what it says. Research in rodents has shown that some chemicals that bind androgen receptors can disrupt fetal brain development, particularly in boys, who are more likely than girls to be diagnosed with autism. Brown says his group is beginning rodent studies to test this hypothesis. This is real problematic. We don't have so much DDT in the United States anymore, but DDT is still actively being used in parts of South Asia and Africa and southern India on a regular basis. And if it's producing an epidemic of autism, that's not a good thing. We'll be back with your calls on Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. In just a moment, you're listening to the True People's Media. Stick around. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And you can check out our podcasts and everything else, all the other cool stuff over at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Let's see here. Carol, watching us on YouTube in Seattle. Hey, Carol, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I'm calling about climate change.
Carol, I can hardly hear you. Could you please take us off speakerphone?
Oh. Is that better?
That's somewhat better. It still sounds like you're in a tunnel.
I'm sorry. I don't know what to do to fix it.
Okay. So what's up?
I'm wondering if you have come across something in your climate change research called HAARP. That's HAARP, and it's a government entity run by, it closed, I think, in 2014, but it was run by the Air Force, the Navy, the University of Alaska, and DARPA, and it was based on Nikola Tesla's research. And it, the way I understand it, I'm no scientist, but the radio waves that ordinarily from a tower would broadcast ending in a large end of a cone are reversed, and it would start from the large end of the cone and then focus, and it would heat and manipulate the ionosphere. Yeah. And the Air Force claimed at some point, I don't know, some 10 years ago or so, maybe more, that they owned the weather. Yeah. And this
Carol, you're buying into a conspiracy theory. Here's how it works. Radio frequency radiation, radio waves, can penetrate different things depending on their frequency. Microwave radiation, which is very, very high frequency radiation, 2 billion cycles per second and higher. Microwave radiation has a very, very hard time penetrating anything that's metallic, for example, which is why your microwave with a metal door doesn't whack you. High frequency, very high frequency radiation, like UHF TV frequencies and the frequencies that are used for cell towers, they can only travel, up to a mile or a few miles with any ease. It becomes much more difficult for them to travel, hundreds of miles. Lower frequency radiation, FM frequencies, where you're just, 100 megahertz. FM frequencies can travel, 50 miles or thereabouts, but they're somewhat limited too. You get into the lower frequency radiations, where it's only thousands of cycles per second, or hundreds of thousands of cycles per second. There you're, like 560 AM, that's 560,000 cycles per second, right? There you can actually bounce a signal off the ionosphere and transmit it all the way to Europe on when the weather's just right. You can have an AM signal that travels a really long distance, but it still won't penetrate the Earth or the ocean. None of these frequencies are low enough to penetrate the Earth or the ocean. As frequencies get lower and lower and lower, that is fewer cycles per second, and yes, Tesla did develop this. As frequencies get lower and lower, they become more and more capable of penetrating things that higher frequency radiation can't penetrate, like the oceans. And the problem that the military had was how to communicate with submarines in the deep sea. And what they developed was this HARP program that transmits at like 10 to 40 cycles per second. It's called ELF, extremely low frequency radiation. And it's basically to communicate with our submarines. And that's why it's there. And a whole bunch of people who don't understand, this basic principle, and low frequency radiation doesn't heat up anything. That's microwave stuff. So the people who don't understand this develop this elaborate conspiracy theory that has taken on a life of its own. And that's all it is, Carol. There's no science behind it at all. So, relax. We'll be back. Thanks for the call. "20 minutes past the hour, the Thom Hartmann Program, where despair is not an option. On the line with us, Dave from Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, thanks for listening to Sirius XM. What's on your mind today?
Hey, not too much, Tom. Hey, the other day you were talking about how as the human population has increased exponentially along with the progression of time and technology.
Right.
And that's it's kind of a deep topic, and I know sometimes you steer away from them because you don't like to generalize. But I wanted to get your take on this study, if you have one. It's an Earth biomass study that shows that, the human population, even if you include livestock, accounts for less than 1% of the biomass on the Earth. However, we consume the vast majority. And I guess my question is this. A, does that worry you? And B, do you think we'll reach a tipping point to where we will consume so much of what's in our biosphere that the Earth can't replenish it?
I think we passed that tipping point back sometime between the 1930s and the 1970s. And I don't recall the exact point. I remember reading about this, and I might have written about it when I was writing Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight back in 1996. And the point was that we had, at that point, passed 50% of the Earth's NPP, the net photosynthetic productivity. All the products of photosynthesis on the Earth, more than 50% of them were being used by humanity or were being degraded by humanity. And, that's clearly a point at which we're no longer sustainable. I don't think that we have been sustainable as a population without the extraction of massive natural resources that are, we're outcompeting every other species on Earth, where the oceans are on the verge of dying. You've got massive species extinctions. I'm not seeing bugs anymore or butterflies, and very rarely seeing any kind of bird other than the occasional seagull, crow, or scrub jay. Our biosphere all around us is dying, as far as I can tell. I was walking into work this morning. We've got these greenways all around Portland, and you can walk for, I walk about a little more than a mile to get to work. And it's on a path that, follows, waterways and all kinds of cool stuff. And, I saw a little bunny a couple of days ago, but that's about it. I mean, the wildlife is just being wiped out all over the planet. So, yeah, this concerns me tremendously, Dave. I don't know that we're 1% of the planet's biomass. Certainly we're consuming probably, I hesitate to put a number on it. If you've got the actual study, Dave, tweet it to me. I do read my Twitter feed every day, and I'll check it out. But it does concern me. Where do you want to go with that, Dave?
Oh, no, I was hoping you'd make me a little bit less concerned about it, but apparently that's not going to happen. No, I'm very concerned about it as well.
There are two things that we can do about this, and the first is to eat less meat. Eating meat is like every meal that you have that has meat on it is 20, 30, 40 times harder on the environment than a meal that is entirely vegetable products. So, if we all became vegans, overnight, you would see a massive liberation of large chunks of the biosphere. Number one. And number two is, do everything we can to reduce our carbon footprint. That's much more difficult. That's something that has to be done on a systemic level, on a policy level, at the level of governance.
but there's got to be some point of criticality where it can't be reversed. You know what I'm saying? It's a chain reaction. It can't be.
You know, I'm not sure of that because if you look at it will always be reversed, Dave. It's just the question of is it going to be reversed in human timescales or in geologic timescales? Every time, you know, we've had 5 major extinctions on the Earth, and life has always bounced back. It bounces back in different ways. You know, different species will emerge. We're seeing invasive species traveling around the world. We're seeing species start to mutate as a consequence of humanity's involvement. But, you know, life is resilient. The planet is resilient. The question is, will the human species survive, or will the species on which we depend for our life survive? And that is up in the air. Dave, thanks for the call. I don't mean to sound too pessimistic, but these are some things that we really do need to take very seriously. David in Tampa, Florida. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Mr. Hartmann, thank you for having me.
Sure.
Pleasure. I am an independent, and you know, I kind of see myself as dead down the middle, and I like.
I don't know what that means.
I like to be, well, as far as between Republicans and liberals, Democrats, that kind of thing, and you know, I see. At least I try to see both sides.
But you know, what are the both sides? Can you give me any policy issue that you see a middle ground on? You know, should we strengthen Social Security or should we privatize it? Where's the middle ground?
Very, you know, good question. Social Security, you know, like I said, that to me is a government-funded retirement plan, and you know, I don't think the government should be in that.
Well,
right?
it's actually funded by us. It's not funded by the government. It's facilitated by the government.
We are the government, though. We are the government.
No, we are not. We elect the government.
Right. Okay. Fair enough. I'll agree with that. My point being, though, is I'm very concerned about this whole socialism movement on the left, and I don't like because socialism really has not worked in any other country in the world.
Have you ever visited Scandinavia, David?
Yes, I have, and as a matter of fact, if you want to go there, let's talk about the movement in Sweden to the far right. As a matter of fact, the far right is about to win a big election.
Oh, I know, but their whole thing is we hate immigrants. Their whole thing is we hate immigrants, and to the extent that they want to dial back the Swedish welfare system, it's because they don't think that immigrants should be able to get, you know, our equivalent of food stamps and housing support. It's all about hating brown people.
Well, no. See, all right, and I disagree with that. That's about people who don't want to supply people coming into the country with money that they've hard earned, and I don't see what's wrong with that. First of all, number two, you know, you claim Bernie Sanders. I've heard him multiple times complain about the top 4 or 5 richest people in the world. Well, my problem becomes is why does Mr. Sanders have the right to decide who can make what and where?
Well, when great wealth, Thomas Jefferson pointed this out numerous times. In fact, his solution, he said, when great wealth endangers democracy, it should be taxed by geometric progression in accordance with the wealth. Dave just hung up. It's a great conversation, Dave, and I'm sorry we're hitting the break right now. Had I known that this was your topic and that you wanted to argue with me, I would have tried to give you a little more time. But we'll talk about it on the other side of the break. It's 20. Actually, I don't have that much control of it. It's 27 minutes after the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Anything Goes Friday. I'll pick up a little rant on democratic socialism on the other side of the break. Stick around. Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Settlers, The Mythology of the White Proletariat, The True Story of the White Nation by J. Sakai, published by Morningstar Press in 1989. This is from Chapter 2, The Foundations of Settler Life. The life of European settlers and the class structure of their society was abnormal because it was dependent upon a foundation of conquest, genocide, and enslavement. The myth of the self-sufficient white settler family clearing the wilderness and supporting themselves through their own initiative and hard labor is a propaganda fabrication. It is the absolute characteristic of settler society to be parasitic, dependent upon the super-exploitation of oppressed peoples for its style of life. Never has Euro-American society completely supported itself. This is the decisive factor in the consciousness of all classes and strata of white society from 1600 to now. Settler society was raised up above the level of backward old Europe by a foundation of conquest. This conquest was a miracle drug for a Europe convulsed with the reaction of decaying feudalism and deadly capitalism. Shot into the veins of the Spanish feudal nation, for instance, the miracle drug of the New World conquest gave Spain the momentary power to overrun North Africa, Holland, and Italy before her historical incident waned. Like many such fixes for Euro-Americans, this conquest was addicting. It was habit-forming and rapidly indispensable, not only culturally, but in the mechanism of an oppressor society whose lifeblood was new conquest. We'll examine this later in the relationship of settlerism to imperialism. For now, it's enough to see that this conquest is a material act of great magnitude, an economic and social event as important as the emergence of the factory system or the exploitation of petroleum in the Middle East. We stress the obvious here because the Euro-American settlers have always made light of their invasion and occupation, although the conquered territory is the precondition for their whole society. Traditionally, European settler societies throw off the propaganda smoke screens that they didn't really conquer and dispossess other nations. They claim with false modesty that they merely moved into vacant territory. So the early English settlers depicted America as empty, a howling wilderness, unsettled, sparsely populated, just waiting with a vacant sign on the door for the first lucky civilization to walk in and claim it. Theodore Roosevelt wrote defensively in 1900, quote, "The settler and pioneer have at bottom had justice on their side. This great continent could not have been kept as nothing but a game preserve for squalid savages," end of quote. It is telling that this lie is precisely the same lie put forward by white Afrikaner settlers who claim that South Africa was literally totally uninhabited by any Africans when they arrived from Europe. To universal derision, these European settlers claim to be the only rightful historic inhabitants of South Africa. Or we can hear similar defenses put forward by the European settlers of Israel, who claim that much of the Palestinian land and buildings they occupy are rightfully theirs, since the Arabs had allegedly decided to voluntarily abandon it all during the 1948-49 war. Are these kinds of tales any less preposterous than those put forward by Euro-American settlers? America was spacious and sparsely populated only because the European invaders destroyed whole civilizations and killed off millions of Native Americans to get the land and profits they wanted. We all know that when the English arrived at Virginia, for example, they encountered an urban, village-dwelling society far more skilled than they were in the arts of medicine, agriculture, fishing, and government. This civilization was reflected in a chain of 300 Indian nations and peoples stretching from the Arctic Circle to the tip of South America, many of whom had highly developed societies. There was, in fact, a greater population in these Indian nations in 1492 than in all of Western Europe. Recent scholarly estimates indicate that at the time of Columbus, there were 100 million Indians in the hemisphere, 10 million in North America, 25 million in Central Mexico, and an additional 65 million elsewhere in Central and South America. These numbers have long been concealed since they give rise to the logical question of what happened to this great mass of people. The European invaders, Spanish, Dutch, English, Portuguese, and French, simply killed off millions and millions to safeguard their conquest of the land and provide the disposable slave labor they needed to launch their new world. Conservative Western historical estimates show that the Spanish reduced, in quotes, the Indian population of their colonies from some 50 million to only 4 million by the end of the 17th century. And from the 10 million Indians who once inhabited North America, after 4 centuries of settler invasion and rule, there were in 1900 perhaps 200,000 to 300,000 surviving descendants in the United States. This was the very substantial down payment towards the continuing blood price that third world nations have to pay to sustain the Euro-American way of life. So when we hear that the settlers pushed out the Indians or forced the Indians to leave their traditional hunting grounds, we know that these are just code phrases to refer politely to the most barbaric genocide imaginable. It could well be the greatest crime in all of human history. Only here, the Adolf Eichmanns and Heinrich Himmlers had names like Benjamin Franklin and Andrew Jackson. The point is that genocide was not an accident, not an excess, not the unintended side effect of virile European growth. Genocide was the necessary and deliberate act of the capitalists and their settler shock troops. the book Settlers.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Okay, let's just clarify a few things. Democratic Socialists, they do not want to have the government own industry in the United States. So they're not Marxist socialists. Karl Marx defined socialism as the ownership of the means of production by the state. That is not what democratic socialists want. They want private business to be private business. No democratic socialist wants the government to make our blue jeans or our cars or anything else. So number one, dial down your hysteria. This is a completely different thing. Number two, democratic socialism is what Franklin Roosevelt was practicing and preaching with the New Deal, with the WPA, with long-term unemployment insurance, with the Social Security Administration, with the right of labor to unionize. These were all democratic socialist positions. This was expanded by Lyndon Johnson in the 1960s with Medicare and Medicaid and other social safety net programs. That's democratic socialism in a nutshell. And the countries that practice democratic socialism, the Northern European countries, have the highest quality of life on earth. Canada practices democratic socialism. Everybody in the country has free health care. I mean, literally free. You don't pay for drugs, you don't pay for anything. And you know, here in the United States, we have practiced some democratic socialism with Social Security, Medicare, public education for everybody, free K through 12. You know, our public roads are democratic socialist. You know, and yeah, you've got the Koch brothers and other libertarian billionaires out there who want to own all of that stuff, all of those commons, and you know, they are trying to use the word socialism to attack it. It's a BS attack, and you know, anybody under 40 knows this. This is stuff that mostly people who remember the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the USSR, we remember that as socialism. That is not what democratic socialists are talking about. Pure and simple, period, end of discussion. Fred in Hillsborough, Maryland. Hey, Fred, what's on your mind? Fred? Lucy on Sirius? No Fred. Okay. Fred's been on hold for like an hour, though. He's on line 5, sure, if you want to find out what's going on. Maybe I'm not sure if he gave up or what. Richard in Los Angeles. Hey, Richard, thanks for listening to Sirius XM. What's up?
Hey, Tom. Could you please explain to me why Trump wants his stupid military parade, which is going to cost millions and millions of dollars?
Because he has an empty bucket. He's got a deep hole in his soul. He constantly needs love, praise, and reassurance. And when he stood next to Macron in Paris during the last Bastille Day celebration last year, and saw, you know, large chunks of the French military or representatives of the French military marching by, saluting Macron, you know, with great pride and all this kind of stuff. It was you know, something that just, you know, he couldn't. He was like, wow, I want people to love me like that. I want them to salute me like that. I think that's what it's all about. I don't think he cares what, you know, even, you know, us as tourists watching it. I think he just wants to have a whole bunch of the military saluting him.
And then the mayor, now he's blaming the mayor for overestimating the cost.
Right, which is BS. I mean, you know, it is going to cost the city of Washington, D.C. a lot, particularly if he brings heavy equipment on. They're going to have to repave all the streets and maybe reinforce them before the parade. And, you know, it's going to be very expensive. And, you know, he's claiming, oh, you know, we can't do it because of D.C. I think what's happening is the military itself. One of the military organizations, it might have been the Military Times, which is owned by Gannett, did a survey. I'm not sure it was, though, but it was public. I saw it in 2 different newspapers. It's been recently published, where they did a survey of active duty military members and found that over 80% of them thought that the military parade, was either a stupid idea or an outright bad idea that hearkened to, you know, dictatorships and whatnot. I mean, in France, it's a celebration of defeating the Nazis. There are still people alive in France who remember the defeat of the Nazis. Not a lot of them, but there are still some. And, you know, they're going to celebrate that for a while. It was a big deal. You know, the Nazis did not invade the United States, and we did not, you know, we did not fight that battle here. So I'm guessing that, you know, they're more interested in having a military style, yeah, we won, than we are. But, you know, I just think it's sad. Richard, thank you for the call. Excellent point. And Fred in Hillsborough, Maryland. Hey, Fred, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I've been reading where the media companies have all tried to band together to push back on the quote-unquote fake news, but I think the media, print and electronic, both factions need to put out an education program to educate people the difference between, let's say, facts or the points of the story, how to look for the 5 W's in a story,
right,
and to tout page 2, and especially in print. I mean, where they can look if we screw up something today, it's going to be on page 2 tomorrow as a correction or an amplification, as they say. And the electronic's going to be tougher because how many, especially I'll pick on Fox, the show host, are they journalists? Are they opinion social commentators?
Yeah, you're essentially calling for critical thinking skills to be taught in our schools, and I completely agree. The 5 W's and the H of journalism: who, what, when, where, why, and how, are not always clearly identifiable in a lot of these so-called news stories. The fake news stories, in particular, they tend to go on innuendo or hysteria. Who is the source of this thing is not something that we pay a lot of attention to, or that a lot of Americans don't. Whether they're believing that the system to communicate with submarines is part of some giant weather experiment or whatever. It's just, I'm with you, Fred.
Because all they're doing right now is just responding. Oh, it's not fake news. Well, that's in Sun Tzu. They've lost the war.
Yeah, I agree.
They're responding, but they've got to educate the public because we need to be reminded of what facts are. They're not more than words. If a right-wing radio talk show host says these are the facts, well, maybe they aren't. They're just his words. But
or a left wing, for that matter, too. I mean, I take as a point of pride, the 15 years I've been doing this show, I don't think that you can point to anything that I've ever said and held to. I mean, I've said a few things that were wrong. I go out of my way to backtrack, clarify, say I was wrong on this. But anything that I have said and hold to over any kind of period of time at all, more than a day or 3, I don't think you can find anything that is inaccurate in anything that I've said. On the other hand, if you go to MediaMatters.org, literally every day they are fact-checking Fox News and some of the right-wing hate radio out there, and it's shocking the stuff that these people are telling people that people are believing. Yes. I'm with you, Fred.
Yes.
Very, very well said. Thank you very much. Patrick in Snoqualmie, Washington. Hey, Patrick, thanks for listening to KBCS.
Yeah.
What's up?
Yeah, Snoqualmie. Thanks for taking my call, Tom. I listen to you in my dump truck.
Aha, cool.
And I really enjoy it, which brings me to my moral dilemma. I'm driving a dump truck. I've owned and operated dump trucks for 20 years. Mm-hmm. And so I'm kind of tied to the economy, right?
Right.
Good economy, good times. People need roads. People need houses, utilities to their homes, things like this. But there I go to the diesel pump every day at the end of the day, and I buy 40 gallons of diesel for each truck.
So what's your question?
Honestly, it puts me in a moral dilemma. I think about the earth that we live in, but it's not my fault everybody wants a house or a road, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. That's where I get tied up, and I'm curious about your thoughts. Like, how do we balance society wants these things, and it's tied to petroleum.
Right.
And, I don't know. I honestly, sometimes, you're a businessman. I don't know. I don't know how to balance that.
Well, one of the things that we know, Patrick, is that, and we know this from looking at European countries, that electric vehicles can power trains. They do all over Europe. They do a few of them here, but trains are not small or lightweight devices. They can power trucks. You've got electric-powered trucks now. Volvo is making them. They're traveling in Europe. So I think that the day when electric-powered dump trucks come and the electricity is being generated by water power, wind power, or solar power is not that far down the road. Because the technology now works. It's just a matter of getting it into broad use, and that typically takes a little bit of help from the government, tax credits or something like that for using electric rather than diesel. But the other part of that is that the simple reality is that no matter whether if you were to say, okay, that's it, I'm sick and tired of using all this diesel fuel, I'm just going to go out of business and go on food stamps or get a job at McDonald's, that's not going to save the environment at all, because somebody else is going to come along and buy your dump truck at a bargain price and go back into your business. So, this is why all of us who are concerned about these issues, and these are legitimate concerns that you're raising, all of us who are concerned about these issues need to educate ourselves about what the alternatives are. And I think, as I said, electric vehicles is the way that everything is going to be going. And you're starting, and they're actually making some of these things. They're making heavy equipment in China that's electric powered. I'm not sure if they're making dump trucks, but things like graders and whatnot. And it's just a matter of working for the policies at the federal and state level. And what state are you in? You're in Washington State. I mean, Washington State's fairly progressive. Yeah. Maybe you could encourage your state legislators even to put programs in place that would incentivize, manufacturers of heavy equipment like dump trucks to create ones that are electric powered. It's not rocket science. It's actually a technology that is fully mature right now. So, we need to be looking at these things at a systems level, at a policy level, rather than at the individual level. At the individual level, we can sit around and beat ourselves up all day long. Oh, my God, I was on an airplane. Oh, my God, I drove my car. But, it's not, and those behaviors, when you add them up over millions and millions of people, actually do have a consequence, a negative consequence. But individually changing them is not going to have that large a consequence. The only area that I know of where individual change actually has a large change out there in the world, and that it's viral, it's contagious, and more people can be awakened to it, is eating meat and other animal products. The extent that we can actually get healthier by eating a vegetable-based diet, it actually helps us. So anyhow, but that's about it. Patrick, thanks for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We're going to check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world right after this break. Stick around. It's 45 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Mitch, watching us on Free Speech TV in Astoria, Oregon. Oh, Astoria is one of our favorite towns. It's such a great city. Mitch, what's on your mind today?
Oh, thank you, Tom, for taking my call. Hope you're well, and thank you for everything you do.
Thanks. Back at you, Mitch. What's up?
Appreciate the fact that so many callers, and it's really optimistic to hear many of them talking about the environment, which is the only problem really that is paramount. None of the other stuff really matters.
It's the one that could wipe us all out, yeah.
Yeah, and I appreciate what you do to help in your own personal way, walking to work, living on a boat. I, too, am a free spirit who does the same thing, only mine is a RV or a camper that goes up and down the coast, and I do all I can to do my own political small steps, I call them, or personal politicking. Mm-hmm. And that involves volunteering for gardens that are for food banks and planting fruit trees. And one of the things I called about was recycling. As you know, we have this monstrous plastic thing washing ashore during the typhoons, and it just says to me once again that we all have to take personal responsibility for what we do and the choices we make.
I agree, but following on my rant from the last caller, we also need to take, and I think it's even more important that we take societal responsibility. We need to participate in the political and educational processes that drive large social changes, like a move toward recycling. I lived in Michigan in the 70s when a bunch of activists were trying to get what do you call it, where you redeem a bottle, a fee on bottles. And, you pay 5 cents extra for the bottle, and then recycling, there's a word for it, but it's escaping me. Well, but it was like that was driven by activists, and it produced a change. I mean, we measurably, dramatically reduced the amount of trash along the roadsides in Michigan by simply passing the bottle bill.
Well, you're right about the fact that getting involved in societal issues is important. Only the thing is, I noticed by traveling and talking with people up and down the coast, that there's a lot of people that are trying their best to just mentally handle all this stress.
Yeah.
And I would just like to point out that what's important here is that we model actions speak louder than words. model the behavior that your callers want, and which I'm sure you do as well. And that is not using plastic straws, for instance, not wasting your water unnecessarily, making sure that you avoid fast food and try to eat fresh produce rather than packaged stuff. I was at the first Whole Earth Day in Davis back when Charles Manson's name was on the front page rather than the Whole Earth Day. And I've been an activist probably as long as you have. I'm just trying to wrap my head around the newer generation and how they're approaching the issues that faced us.
Yeah, I think they're doing good. I have great hope because of the millennial generation. We're seeing, millennials really, they are woke. They know what's going on, by and large. And Mitch, it's great that you're basically a troubadour for all these, a traveling evangelist. Good on you. Thanks a lot for the call, and thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. We'll be right back. Thank you so much for watching the Thom Hartmann Program, our program here on Free Speech TV. We really appreciate it. The main way that we support our program, that all of us who work here get our paychecks and that we keep the lights on and whatnot here. Free Speech TV does that by asking you to donate, a couple times a year, and that keeps Free Speech TV alive. We keep our show alive principally, mostly, by advertising. We have advertisers who pay the bills. They support the program. And we've told you about some of them in the past, but really want to just move all that onto the internet. So if you would like to support our program by supporting our underwriters, our advertisers, you can go to thomhartmann.com. There's a complete list of them, or there will be soon, and just click on their little ads and find out what they have and be there for them and for us. Thank you so much. Welcome back. Cameron Hughes, I was just reading an ad for Cameron Hughes Wine. This is just amazing stuff that Cameron Hughes is doing. chwine.com/Tom is the website, FYI. Luke Vargas on the line with us with Talk Media News. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Loving What You Do, Ellen Ratner's new book. Luke, welcome back. Syria, Saudi Arabia, the Emiratis, what's going on here?
So this is sort of a slow developing story, but it's finally come to a head today. So in March of this year, when Tillerson leaves, Pompeo comes in to replace him, the U.S. government puts a hold on about $200 million in money that we had already appropriated to help rebuild and stabilize Syria after the defeat of the Islamic State.
So this was put into place during the Obama administration?
No. This was just in the Tillerson to Pompeo transition. This money had been appropriated by the Trump administration last year as it was winding down the fight in Syria, particularly after the recapture of Raqqa. And Tillerson, I think we covered it at the time, around the beginning of this year, gave a big speech talking about, a multi-year strategy to make sure that the hard-fought gains in Syria were preserved.
Right.
And I think we noted at the time that this sort of long view stabilization mentality from Tillerson, while it made sense, was in sharp contrast to the kind of let's get out quickly and declare victory mentality that President Trump has had regarding Syria. And so unsurprisingly, when Tillerson is shown the door and Pompeo comes in, the remaining $193 million that we had already put aside to essentially, go to Raqqa to do a little bit of physical rebuilding, but mostly to be working with NGOs and civil society groups to help ensure that there's good governance in the wake of the Islamic State exit, that we're building institutions in those
fill that
recaptured cities. Right, and supporting Kurdish fighters in eastern Syria that helped us recapture much of this territory. Right. And so what now has officially happened, as of today, is that the U.S. has officially said we are not going to spend that money. We're going to put it to other things in our military. And asked by reporters, sort of, like, is this appropriate? Shouldn't we be spending this? The administration has said, well, the Saudis are going to pay for it and the Emiratis are going to pay for it. I think it's $100 million from the Saudis, $50 million from the Emiratis, and there's apparently another $150 million coming from other Gulf allies of ours. I just got off the phone with two experts, Stephen Heidemann from the Middle East Studies program at Smith College and Joe Barnes from the Baker Institute at Rice University, and both of them basically said we should not confuse American dollars and Saudi dollars in this fight. That it, in some ways, yes, this money is going to go to NGOs and it's going to go to third-party groups. It's not like you're going to have American soldiers, passing out the cash and shaking hands with locals. But it's going to be pretty clear to the civilians of Raqqa and to the Kurdish fighters that we fought alongside that we came in, we destroyed Raqqa in an effort to get rid of the Islamic State, and we talked a big game about how stable institutions need to come up in their wake, but we're not there to see it done, and that is going to, in many ways, increase the likelihood that the U.S. might need to go back, that these weakened communities are going to have fewer resources and no more lying to Washington. I think that's really important here. It's not just about the dollar figures. It's about what does this money, what kind of other benefits come along with it. Right. And the fact is, when we give this money, there are American interests on the ground occasionally, which sort of are looking into whether that money is being spent wisely. And it's important for local actors to be able to appeal to us if they see that money being spent unwisely. So the summary here is sort of penny wise, pound foolish, that, we are for a battle that President Trump has said is so important. We may well, and pair this with our story earlier this week, that the UN thinks there's 20 to 30,000 Islamic State fighters in this region anyways. We may well be needing to go back, and we're going to have to go back in as opposed to already being there in the first place.
Amazing. I reported a little earlier in the program that it's being reported that China is having their bomber pilots trained for strikes against the United States. Is this something we should worry about?
American targets in East Asia is how that needs to be clarified. Okay. This is not,
So East Asia, would that be, you mean Taiwan, Japan, South Korea, or you mean U.S. military bases?
Yeah, so a little bit of both. So this is a report that the Pentagon puts out every year where they assess the People's Liberation Army. And they say the biggest thing we've watched over recent years is new aerial campaigns to do a blockade of Taiwan. So they're basically sending jets and bombers all the way around Taiwan so that they can close it down from all sides. There's also some mention of possibly having greater capabilities, demonstrating the capabilities to strike bases like Okinawa or Guam. But I'd say the biggest takeaway here is that that's closing the gap with the U.S. military in full view. This report also says something not surprising. China's doing that in secret. They continue to use cyber theft, other sorts of computer intrusions, illicit approaches to obtain national security and export restricted technologies. So they're catching up both behind the scenes and in full view of us and our allies.
Wow. Amazing. Luke, I always appreciate your insights. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.
Yep. Luke Vargas with Talk Media News. You can find him on Twitter at The Courier. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
reading today from a book by David Sanger, the Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times national security reporter. The title of the book is The Perfect Weapon: War, Sabotage, and Fear in the Cyber Age. We're reading from the preface. A year into Donald J. Trump's presidency, his defense secretary, Jim Mattis, sent the new commander-in-chief a startling recommendation. With nations around the world threatening to use cyber weapons to bring down America's power grids, cell phone networks, and water supplies, Trump should declare that he's ready to take extraordinary steps to protect the country. If any nation hit America's critical infrastructure with a devastating strike, even a non-nuclear one, it should be forewarned that the United States might reach for a nuclear weapon in response. Like most things in Washington, the recommendation leaked immediately. Excuse me. Many declared it a crazy idea and wild overkill. While nations had turned their cyber weapons against each other dozens of times in recent years, no attack had yet proven to cost a human life, at least directly. Not the American attacks on Iran's and North Korea's weapon programs, not the North Korean attacks on American banks, a famed Hollywood studio, and the British healthcare system, not the Russian attacks in Ukraine, Europe, and then at the core of American democracy. That streak of luck was certain to end soon, but why should Donald Trump or any of his successors take the huge risk of escalating a cyber war by going nuclear? The Pentagon's recommendation, it turned out, was the prelude to other proposals delivered to a president who values toughness and America first to use the nation's powerful cyber weapons far more aggressively. But it was also a reminder of how quickly the fear of devastating cyber attacks has moved from the stuff of science fiction and die-hard movies to the center of American defense strategy. Just over a decade before, in 2007, cyber attacks were missing entirely from the global threat assessment that intelligence agencies prepare each year for Congress. Terrorism topped that list, along with other post-9/11 concerns. Now that hierarchy has been reversed. For several years, a variety of cyber threats, ranging from a paralyzing strike on the nation's cities to a sophisticated effort to undercut public confidence in its institutions, has appeared as the nation's #1 threat on the list. Not since the Soviets tested the bomb in 1949 had the perception of threats facing the nation been revised so quickly. Yet Mattis, who had risen to 4-star status in a career focused in the Middle East, feared that the 2 decades spent chasing al-Qaeda and ISIS around the globe had distracted America from its most potent challenges. Great power competition, not terrorism, is now the primary focus of U.S. national security, he said in early 2018. America's, quote, competitive edge has eroded in every domain of warfare, including the newest one, cyberspace. The nuclear strategy he handed Trump gave voice to an inchoate fear among many in the Pentagon that cyber attacks posed a threat unlike any other, one that we had completely failed to deter. The irony is that the United States remains the world's stealthiest, most skillful cyber power, as the Iranians discovered when their centrifuges spun out of control, and the North Koreans suspected as their missiles fell out of the sky. But the gap is closing. Cyber weapons are so cheap to develop and so easy to hide that they've proven irresistible. And American officials are discovering that in a world in which almost everything is connected, phones, cars, electrical grids, and satellites, everything can be disrupted, if not destroyed. For several years, the thinking inside the Pentagon was that only nations with nuclear weapons could threaten America's existence. Now that assumption is in doubt. In almost every classified Pentagon scenario for how a future confrontation with Russia and China, or even Iran and North Korea might play out, the adversary's first strike against the United States would include a cyber barrage aimed at civilians. It would fry power grids, stop trains, silence cell phones, and overwhelm the internet. In the worst-case scenarios, food and water would begin to run out. Hospitals would turn people away. Separated from their electronics and thus their connections, Americans would panic and turn against one another. The Pentagon is now planning for this scenario because it knows many of its own war plans open with similarly paralyzing cyber attacks against our adversaries, reflecting new strategies to try to win wars before a shot is fired. Glimpses of what this would look like have leaked out in recent years, thanks partly to Edward J. Snowden, partly because of a mysterious group called the Shadow Brokers, suspected of close links to Russian intelligence, to obtain terabytes of data containing many of the tools that the National Security Agency used to breach foreign computer networks. It didn't take long for some of those stolen cyber weapons to be shot back at America and its allies. in attacks whose bizarre-sounding names, like WannaCry, suddenly appeared in the headlines every week. Yet the secrecy surrounding these programs obscures most public debate about the wisdom of using them or the risks inherent in losing control of them. The government's silence about America's new arsenal and its implications poses a sharp contrast to the first decades of the nuclear era. The horrific scenes of destruction at Hiroshima and Nagasaki not only seared the national psyche, but made America's destructive capabilities, and soon Russia's and China's, obvious and undeniable. Yet even while the government kept the details classified, how to build atomic weapons, where they are stored, and who has the authority to order their launch, America engaged in a decades-long political debate about when to threaten to use the bomb and whether to ban it. The book, The Perfect Weapon by David E. Sanger. Thank you so much for watching the Thom Hartmann program, our program here on Free Speech TV. We really appreciate it. The main way that we support our program, that all of us who work here get our paychecks and that we keep the lights on and whatnot here. Free Speech TV does that by asking you to donate, a couple times a year, and that keeps Free Speech TV alive. We keep our show alive principally, mostly, by advertising. We have advertisers who, pay the bills. They support the program. And we've told you about some of them in the past, but really want to just move all that onto the internet. So if you would like to support our program by supporting our underwriters, our advertisers, you can go to thomhartmann.com. There's a complete list of them, or there will be soon, and just click on their little ads and find out what they have and be there for them and for us. Thank you so much.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Of wasting time.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's the third hour Friday of our program, picking up your calls. Anything Goes Friday. I did want to keep you up to date on the news of the day, what's going on out there. This most recent one is the Democrats know that Brett Kavanaugh, the guy that Donald Trump wants to put in the Supreme Court, that he lied to Congress, which, by the way, is a 5-year felony. He lied to Congress back in 2006 when they were, in his confirmation hearings, when they were considering putting him on the D.C. Circuit Court bench. This is the second highest court in America by and large. Most of the people who end up on the Supreme Court were on the D.C. Circuit first. It's the one that deals with most government stuff. And Brett Kavanaugh in 2006 was, he had been appointed to this by George W. Bush in payment for his working in the George W. Bush administration, helping vet torture memos and the torture of people, of human beings, and helping vet the illegal wiretapping of Americans. And when he got up before Congress, first of all, we've got the proof of this. I mean, there's actually emails. There are at least 2 publicly available documents. This from Daily Kos, a piece by Joan McCarter. There are at least two publicly available documents on the Bush Library website. You can see this on the internet right now, that show that Brett Kavanaugh was absolutely involved in government rendition, in the treatment of detainees, and illegal wiretapping during when he was the staff secretary to George W. Bush. In fact, he laid out a set of talking points about the secret torture policy. But when he got before the committee, he said, and I quote, "I have not seen or heard anything about the president's wiretapping program until December of 2005, long after this happened." He said he was not aware of any issues regarding the legal justifications of the policies relating to the treatment of detainees. His words was, quote, "not involved in the questions about the rules governing governing detention of combatants." His words, and it had nothing to do with the issues. Excuse me, sneeze. Had nothing to do with issues relating to rendition, and was unaware of and saw no documents related to the warrantless wiretapping program conducted without congressional authorization. These apparently are all lies. Brett Kavanaugh lied in order to become a federal judge, and now he's trying to lie in order to become a member of the Supreme Court. And the Democrats are not having it. They're trying to subpoena these records. The question in my mind is, when does Trump pull his nomination? I mean, this is like Harriet Miers or like Robert Bork. So we'll see. Meanwhile, there is small business owners are asking Congress to restore net neutrality. This is a telepresser event that's happening today. It's being put on by fightforthefuture.org. And they're targeting constituents. These are local business owners who live in the districts of Representative Roscom, who is a Republican for Illinois' 6th District, Representative Gardner, Representative Fazo, who is a Republican representative from New York's 19th District, Kansas City, Representative Yoder from Kansas's 3rd, Syracuse, New York, Representative Katko, who of New York's 24th, and Anchorage, Alaska, Representative Don Young from Alaska, the one congressional district in Alaska. They're targeting these Republicans to say, if you guys will simply join the Democrats in signing this request for a discharge petition so that we can have a vote in the House of Representatives on net neutrality. It's already passed the Senate. Let's get this vote in the House and fix this. Number one. Number two, other news stories here. Shepard Smith has been just doing some amazing stuff on Fox so-called news, basically taking down Sean Hannity every day. I'm wondering, how long is this going to last? How long before Sean Hannity takes down Shepard Smith the way he took down Alan Combs? He got sick and tired of Alan Combs contradicted him. He got him fired. But here's what Shepard Smith said on Fox the other day, pushing back on Sean Hannity's lies. He said, and I quote, "Much of Giuliani's attack on Brennan involved the dossier compiled by the former British spy Christopher Steele that the administration has repeatedly asserted was what began the Russian investigation. It was not what began the Russian investigation. The Russian investigation began after the former Trump policy advisor George Stephanopoulos told an Australian diplomat that the Russians had dirt on his then political opponent Hillary Clinton. That information was passed along to intelligence officials," which is absolutely correct. Trump keeps saying that it was the Steele dossier that started the whole Mueller investigation. It wasn't. It was George Papadopoulos bragging to an Australian diplomat that the Russians had dirt on Hillary and that the Trump campaign was going to get it. For context, Shepard Smith says, the research in the dossier includes 17 memos produced by the former spy Christopher Steele. This is pushing back on the idea that Christopher Steele has been debunked. Shepard Smith said they allege misconduct and a conspiracy between members of the Trump campaign and the Russian government during the 2016 election. Some assertions in the dossier have been confirmed. Other parts are unconfirmed. None of the dossier, to Fox News' knowledge, has been disproven. So here you've got the Fox News operation, Shepard Smith, contradicting the Fox propaganda operation, Sean Hannity. It's fascinating. It's just absolutely fascinating. And finally, George Monbiot has a piece in the Guardian. We're in a new age of obesity. How did it happen? And he's citing a well, actually, maybe he's not. Yeah, somebody called yesterday. No, here it is. It's Jacques Peretti in his film, The Men Who Made Us Fat. Sean tracked this down for me. You can't find it on YouTube or the usual sources because it's a BBC report and it's restricted to England. But they came to the United States and they looked at why did we start getting obese in the 1980s? And it turns out that it was Earl Butz, Ronald Reagan's agriculture secretary, pushing policies that would massively subsidize, your and my tax dollars, massively subsidizing the production of corn. A decade earlier, a group of Japanese scientists had figured out a chemical process to create a brand new chemical compound out of corn. It's called high fructose corn syrup. But it's something that has never been part of the diet of human beings in all of the 3 million years of our evolution, the 250,000 years of our modern history. We've never been exposed to it. But Earl Butz was promoting policies that would replace sugar as a sweetener, which was coming from Cuba and from Central and South America, countries that Reagan didn't like, replace that with high fructose corn syrup, this chemical that whacks us. And now, we know we're actually eating fewer calories than we were in 1976, and yet we're massively fatter than in 1976. Why is it? And he says it's not a decline in manual labor. We're actually working more than we were then. It's not voluntary exercise. Children's physical activity is the same as it was 50 years ago. So what has happened? Sure enough, it's high fructose corn syrup and a lot of other sugar in our diet. High fructose corn syrup, it turns out, Louise and I watched this documentary last night. There are bootleg copies on the internet. And high fructose corn syrup, it turns out, blocks the body's production of a hormone called leptin. Leptin is the hormone that your body produces when it gets sugar levels, blood sugar level signals that say that you've eaten enough, that you're full. And it produces a response in your brain that is like, okay, I'm full, time to stop. Steve Behrman was a guest on our program a month or so ago, and his wife Trudy, Steve and Trudy were staying at our house. And they've both lost a lot of weight since the last time I saw them, which was maybe 6 years ago. They both look, quite healthy and vibrant and just great. And I was like, wow, how'd you lose all that weight? And Steve said, well, we learned that there's this little switch in your body, which is the I've had enough switch. And we just started paying attention to it and stopped eating, and sure enough, Louise made a great meal for them. And halfway through the meal, they both said, thank you very much, we're done. And pushed back plates with half the food on it. If we stopped getting insulted by that, which we weren't, it was really cool. It was in the context of that conversation. And we all started saying, no, I'm done. We'd be a lot healthier. But the problem is that if there's high fructose corn syrup in your food, which is ubiquitous, it's in coleslaw, it's in ketchup. If there's high fructose corn syrup in your body, you don't hear that switch click. It turns off the body's response to leptin, which is what triggers that, okay, I'm full response. So something, on a personal level we can all avoid, and on a societal level, we need to stop subsidizing the production of corn, which has wiped out Mexican farmers and is causing all of us to get obese. And, now they're looking for another story. Oh, let's make it into ethanol. But let's just stop subsidizing it and start growing fruits and vegetables in the breadbasket of America. It's better for us.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Plus, a lot of this corn is being fed to feed animals, which, is not what they're grown to eat. They're supposed to eat grass, and it's causing all kinds of health problems among them, too. And welcome back. Karen in Farmington Hills, Michigan, watching us on YouTube. Hey, Karen, what's on your mind today?
Well, good afternoon, Tom. I've been watching your show all week, and you've been really getting in some good discussions.
Great, thank you.
So, I called because yesterday you had that man who was rather upset. He said, what do you consider information enough? You have to go to school and you have to decide just the way Thom Hartmann wants it.
Right.
Well, pardon?
I said right. I was laughing. Go ahead,
right.
Continue.
Yeah. So I think the point is something called informed consent. So if people start in, just say, well, it would be helpful if people could get two or more sides of a story, and then they can decide for themselves what the facts are and how things work.
Right.
And then and if that isn't good enough, you can say, well, it's just like free will. The Lord gave us free will so we could decide whether or not we wanted to follow him.
Yeah. It's a variation on that. I agree. And informed consent is a legal term that has really taken the medical profession by storm in the last 2 decades. And yeah, that's an interesting idea. I like it, Karen. Thank you very much for the call, and thanks for sharing that with us. Andy in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Andy, thank you for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
Oh, yeah, it's a pleasure to talk to you, Mr. Hartmann. I'd just like to say that I started reading your book, Legacy of Secrecy, about JFK, and it is outstanding.
Thank you. Thank you. A lot of work went into that book. Lamar was the principal author. I did a lot of the research and wrote small parts of it, but Lamar Waldron really did most of the work on that. He deserves the credit.
Yeah, even if any of your readers just go into a bookstore and pick up the first page and you just read what's in the first paragraph, you're like, oh my God, this changes history.
Yeah, I agree.
But I wanted to talk about Trump's current madness and how the Republicans are definitely complicit in his madness, if not his actual scandals with Russia, including Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan. So they're not going to do anything. So I'm wondering, is it possible for the 5 former presidents of the United States to go to the White House? And it doesn't look like a coup d'etat, but it is them going to talk to him. And then those presidents either try to talk sense into him or they're subpoenaed to figure out what they know from the conversations.
Yeah, I don't think that Trump would have any interest in meeting with Obama or Carter or
even all 5 of them.
Yeah, I don't, or Clinton, and he's made his disdain for the Bushes pretty obvious too. I don't think he would have any willingness to talk to them, and I'm not sure that it would produce the outcome you want. It might just further drive him into his corner. He's behaving more and more like a cornered rat, which is the thing that really concerns me.
Well, I'm glad to hear your opinion on it, sir. I hope to talk to you again.
Okay, thanks for the call, Andy. Nice to hear from you, and thanks for watching us on YouTube. It's really tragic to say that the President of the United States is not interested in hearing from people who are well informed. He doesn't get security briefings anymore because he can't sit through the. I mean, Obama used to actually read the security briefings, the presidential daily brief. Trump couldn't read it, so they had to read it to him. And then he decided that was too boring, and so he just stopped taking his briefings. He's getting his national security briefings by watching Fox News. Honest to God, this should trouble all of us. We'll be right back. Hey, Thom Hartmann. Thank you so much for watching the Thom Hartmann Program, our program here on Free Speech TV. We really appreciate it. The main way that we support our program, that all of us who work here get our paychecks and that we keep the lights on and whatnot here. Free Speech TV does that by asking you to donate, a couple times a year, and that keeps Free Speech TV alive. We keep our show alive principally, mostly, by advertising. We have advertisers who pay the bills. They support the program. And we've told you about some of them in the past, but really want to just move all that onto the internet. So if you would like to support our program by supporting our underwriters, our advertisers, you can go to thomhartmann.com. There's a complete list of them, or there will be soon, and just click on their little ads and find out what they have and be there for them and for us. Thank you so much. Welcome back. Maine in Chicago. Hey, Maine, thanks for listening to WCPT. What's on your mind today?
All right. How you doing?
I'm well. What's up?
Yeah. Well, I got this theory about, democracy versus capitalism. And about capitalism, to me, is more socialistic or has socialism in it because it's the socialism of the few. Like that right now, they're knowing that democracy of the people. They've been gnawing at the democracy of the people since Reagan. They've been playing this game of socialism versus democracy, like to me since the colonial days. But to me, we've been under a economic socialistic capitalism.
Yeah, you mean socialism for the rich and scraps for the rest of us?
Yeah, right. It's catch as catch can. I mean, that's why I talk about democratizing capitalism, because we have to put up our issues of free education, free health care, and things that are for the people, because they want the we, us, and ours. We, us, and ours is democracy, but they want me, mine, and yours.
Mm-hmm.
I want mine and yours, and if you don't watch it, I'll get yours.
And it seems to be working. These billionaires are getting more and more billions every day.
Right, and so we have to fight to hold our democracy and to get back what they've been taking from us since Reagan.
Yeah.
Truly.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Maine, and I think that this without the stabilizer of democratic socialism, raw capitalism in a democracy doesn't work, because you end up with a small ruling class of oligarchs who run everything, and when people try to rise up against them, they tend to squash those movements like a bug, or they simply corrupt the government, which is what we're seeing here. Squashing like a bug you're seeing in Turkey, but it's the same thing. So to regulate capitalism, to put down the excesses, and at the same time to provide enough socialism to the people that they're not in the streets. I mean, this is what FDR said. I'm going to save capitalism from itself. How did he do it? With democratic socialism, with Social Security, with unemployment insurance, with housing supports, with programs that put people back to work, with government being the employer of last resort. Pretty straightforward stuff. Maine, spot on. Thank you very much for the call. Mary in Fort Worth, Texas. Hey, Mary, what's up?
Oh, I am so thankful for your program, and I've been really appreciating it.
Thank you.
Much to my regret, I may be one of those voters who helped get Donald Trump elected. I am definitely a democratic socialist who supports single-payer or Medicare for all, public schools, public libraries, public parks, police departments, all those policies that are for the common good. While at the same time, I am a person of very strong religious faith, and though I wouldn't interfere with the civil rights of any person's very personal, private life, I am completely opposed to the comprehensive sex education policies. I am a retired public school teacher that's being pushed by the LGBTQ people, activists, into our public schools at this time. That's comprehensive sex education. I oppose outlawing abortion, but neither do I support abortion on demand. And that issue should be medical and not political. I feel like that the group I'm in is what is more significant and important in the fact that Donald Trump got elected than anyone realizes. And I don't have a voting area now. I can't vote for anything. I wrote in a candidate in 2016. I don't know what I'll do in 2020 if Donald Trump's back on there and we don't have a really strong, good Democratic candidate I can vote for. Do you have any advice or any look into what is going on here with people that vote like me?
Yeah. Well, I consider myself a person of faith, too. What I'm curious about, Mary, is what specifically in comprehensive sex education do you object to?
Well, for one thing, they're pushing it in preschool.
No, but what specific?
And they're mainstreaming homosexual behavior. That's
okay, so what you're objecting to is the idea that in our schools we may be teaching our kids that gay people are normal just like all the rest of us. That's what you're objecting to?
Teaching them, I misunderstood you there. We're teaching them
that gay people are normal just like the rest of us. That being gay is a part of the normal human variety.
I'm addressing the behavior. Little children are not able to comprehend that behavior. And I don't think the public schools are a place for it. The public schools is a place for academic subjects.
Okay. So, it seems to me the public schools are more than that. I would want, in fact, I've been saying this for years, I think it's a real shame that people graduate from high school, not knowing how to change a diaper or how to balance a checkbook. I think that the issue of bigotry against gay people is something that should be addressed in our schools.
Well, of course, I believe it's strictly a behavior that a person decides whether or not they're going to engage in.
I get you believe that, but the science doesn't bear that out. Mary, we'll have to have this conversation another time. I'm sorry we're hitting the break, but thank you for your call.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
That was an interesting and thought-provoking call from a person who's really struggling with these issues. Your thoughts on that? We'll be back. Our book for today is Kickback, Exposing the Global Corporate Bribery Network by David Montero. This is from the introduction, Chapter 1. During Watergate, the appointment of a special prosecutor to investigate Richard Nixon's alleged tampering with elections was intended to mark the close of a sordid chapter in American history. Instead, that effort, culminating in Nixon's resignation, would prove to be only the beginning of a deeper political morass that America would face for decades to come. Congressional investigations would uncover for the first time that multinational corporations, through slush funds and bribes, were not only secretly funding political organizations at home, like Nixon's re-election campaign, but corrupting foreign officials abroad. This new perspective on the corporate abuse of power and its impact overseas would result in the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, FPCA, groundbreaking legislation that, by prohibiting commercial bribery for the first time in history, sought to change how capitalism and political affairs were conducted all around the world. Now, more than 40 years later, we are experiencing a kind of déjà vu as the special counsel investigates whether the president allegedly abused his power, again by obstructing an inquiry into a possible manipulation of our country's elections. Just as was the case in Watergate, whatever special counsel Robert Mueller uncovers will likely mark the beginning, rather than the end, of a reassessment of how power actually operates in this country. And just as in Watergate, there's the possibility that Mueller's far-reaching probe may reveal how tightly political corruption and corporate corruption are linked through bribery, just under the surface of America's political life. Nixon was the recipient of secret corporate donations, which were considered illegal because they should have been disclosed. But the payments, while unlawful, did not compromise the presidential election itself. Mueller's Russian inquiry is directed at a potentially far more serious crime, whether Donald Trump, the head of a sprawling business empire, colluded with a foreign power to deliberately sway the American electorate, committing the very crime that the FCPA had been trying to eradicate since Watergate, the offer of a foreign bribe, a kickback. That law specifically states that a corporate bribe need not involve an actual exchange of money. An offer of anything of value, such as a promise to a foreign government official, is sufficient to violate its terms. This is precisely what Mueller is trying to ascertain, whether Trump, his company, his associates, or his family, or some combination of them, offered a promise to Russian government officials, a quid pro quo, that if they helped Trump by manipulating the elections, Trump, if victorious, would ease U.S. sanctions against Russia. Doing so would allow greater U.S. investment of Russia and would benefit Russian officials and oligarchs, the Trump Business Organization, the corporate interests of the Trump family, and former members of his senior staff, including Paul Manafort, his one-time campaign chairman, and Michael Flynn, his disgraced national security advisor. If the Trump Organization or anyone connected with it did make such a promise, and depending on how that promise was conveyed to Russian officials, the Justice Department would have strong grounds for pursuing an FCPA charge, among others. An FCPA violation is within Mueller's mandate to investigate, quote, any matters that arose or may arise directly from this investigation. As has been widely observed, Mueller has hired 2 former federal law enforcement officials with extensive experience in investigating fraud, money laundering, and overseas bribery. Andrew Weissman, who ran the Justice Department's fraud section, which enforces the FCPA, and Greg Andres, who helped oversee FCPA policy in the criminal division. The drama playing out in Washington starkly highlights the fact that foreign corporate bribery can be a deeply misleading term. We have come to regard it, when we think of it at all, as something that unscrupulous companies do in distant countries, so that any impact it has must be contained overseas. If a corporation pays kickbacks to a greedy government official abroad, why should we be concerned? But in a highly interconnected world, bound together by a global market, a global financial system, and the constant migration of peoples, goods, capital, corruption rarely stays out there. Bribes eventually harm Americans, American society, American values, and American interests, both domestically and around the world, in ways that are difficult to gauge. Why do firms resort to bribery? The obvious reason is to gain an advantage over their competitors. But illicit payments also buy the illusion of growth in the short term, of increased market share and inflated firm value. It does not take into account the harm that this practice causes to companies themselves, sinking employee morale, diminished profit margins, and the possibility of hundreds of millions of dollars in fines and penalties, not to mention a reputation that will be associated with corruption and deceit. They also effectively steal the public's money because the majority of bribery cases involve capital-intensive development and infrastructure projects such as roads, dams, defense systems, oil extraction, or mining that are publicly funded. To recoup the bribes involved in winning such contracts, companies conspire with foreign officials to inflate the costs, sometimes by 10 or even hundreds of millions of dollars. While the companies and the officials win out, taxpayers are left shouldering the burden. Corporate bribes involve a remarkable amount of money. The World Bank has estimated $1 trillion a year, although this may represent the high end. Others have placed the market at 10% of the $4 trillion spent annually on global public procurement. The book Kickback by David Montero.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Thinking about my conversation with Mary just a few minutes ago. Jimmy Bear just tweeted, Tom, the only thing that last caller is struggling with is her own bigotry and homophobia. It's the same old homophobic crap I've been dealing with my entire life. They all sound the same. Mary, if you're still listening or watching, I would counsel you that being gay or not being straight, because there's kind of a spectrum between the two, is not, by and large, a choice that people make. Particularly men, but also I think women as well. It is not a choice that people make. It is something that we are largely born with. We know by the time we're 6, 7, 8 years old, I mean, long before we're old enough to be sexually active. I remember when I was in elementary school, the one, fairly clearly gay kid in my class, we all knew he was. Everybody picked on him over it. And we were 8, 10 years old. This is, and these people grow up knowing that this is who they are, that they're not straight people like you and I are, Mary. And they're tortured by it in many cases because they know that society doesn't accept them, that there are people like you, Mary, who condemn them and say that they're making a choice, and they desperately try to not make that choice. They go to gay conversion therapy and have people pray over them. They take, years of psychotherapy. In some cases, they even try drugs or things, and none of it changes their gender orientation or their sexuality. And just ask anybody, how old were you when you knew you were either straight or gay? Fill in the blank if you know that that's what they are. And they will typically tell you 6, 7, 8 years old. I mean, that is when we become aware of the differences between boys and girls and whatnot. So, and it's not just humans, by the way. We see this in every species. When Louise and I lived down in the Willamette River a few years ago, we had these 2 male ducks that were just inseparable. We called them Adam and Steve. and it was a joke on the homophobes who were making these jokes about Adam and Steve or trashing them. And they were, and they came back, by the way, 2 years in a row. These two were a couple. In the animal kingdom among mammals, you see a small percentage of mammals are gay, and as is a small percentage of humans. And that doesn't mean that we should trash these people. In fact, older cultures, you find many Native American cultures, for example, who actually honored gay people, and said that the gay people were, had an elevated understanding of these things. With regard to sex education in pre-K schools, there is, to the best of my knowledge, no such thing. The government doesn't regulate pre-K schools in any meaningful way outside of issues of safety. And so this is the kind of hysteria that Fox News and right-wing hate radio are pitching to you. Or you've got some preacher, Mary, you're listening to on the radio or subscribing to, who is telling you this to scare the hell out of you, and then will ask you for money. I guarantee whoever's telling you what you told me is also asking you for money. And that's their scam. And that's frankly something that I think Jesus would find a lot more disgusting than, well, I don't think Jesus found gay people disgusting at all. I think he would be completely accepting of them. And I believe he was. I think that there are signals of that in the Bible. So, when we don't take people for who they are, we end up behaving like bigots. And that's not something, I think, Mary, that you want to be. I don't think that Jesus was a bigot. I don't think that Christianity teaches bigotry. So that's my take on that. Jim in Los Angeles, listening on KPFK. Hey, Jim, what's up?
Hey, Tom, my friend, and your sub-million friends and frenemies. One thing that scared me, when I met you and Bernie at Sister Giant, Bernie calling himself a democratic socialist. The media called him a communist. I wanted him to expand the label to DSSS, a Democratic Social Security Socialist. And Miss Cortez has to realize everything she says will be used by Fox, Nixon News, and Sean Insanity to beat all Dems with. You know, no one is against Social Security except Republican politicians. So,
and the billionaires who fund them. Yeah, I get it, Jim, and this is a language and messaging issue that the Democratic Party is having to grapple with right now, and we'll see how it shakes out. But I would just continue saying democratic socialism is Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, public schools, and if you don't like it and you want to do away with those things, then you have no place in the Democratic Party. You know, the Republican Party will welcome you in a heartbeat. Jim, excellent point. Thank you for calling and making it. Pete in Chicago. Hey, Pete, thanks for listening to Chicago's Progressive Talk. What's up?
Oh, hi there. Yeah, I was going to say, with global warming in high gear, should we accelerate our exploration of Mars?
I don't think so. You know, rockets consume, throw out enormous levels of carbon and other wastes into the atmosphere. I don't think that those are. I don't think they're a good idea, frankly. And I don't see any reason for us to be exploring Mars when we've got people who are literally going to sleep. Millions of people in the United States who are going to sleep hungry every night. Why would we go to Mars?
Well, because.
So Elon Musk can build a mansion there?
In 30 years. I mean, what are we going to eat? Our crops will be gone.
Well, you can't grow crops on Mars, Pete.
Huh?
You can't grow crops on Mars. You didn't watch Matt Damon's movie?
I think, shouldn't we try to save some of the human race?
That's my point. Yeah, I would take the millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars that it'll take getting to Mars and put that into making life more useful here on Earth. Pete, thanks for the call. Taya, watching us in Blackfoot, Idaho on Free Speech TV. Hey, Taya, what's up?
Hi, Tom. My name's Taya. It's
Taya,
T-A-Y-A.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that's okay. Last night I was watching the Rachel Maddow show. She's one of my heroes along with you. And she indicated that most of these targeted government officials were also involved with the Russian Trump coalition.
Right. She's trying to. What Trump is trying to do right now is. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
If they lose their security clearance, that they may not have access to the notes and whatnot should they become witnesses in court.
Correct.
And you know, that floored me for a minute because I had been sitting here going, what is the matter with this guy? He just hates everybody. I think this is a strategy, a maneuver that he's taking here. Now, what I want to ask you about that is, will these officials still have access to their papers in regard to the investigations that they were doing at that time?
I believe not. And I think Rachel Maddow was absolutely right in pointing that out. We have all been thinking and saying, and the media was continuing to today, which is unfortunate. Apparently, not that many people in the media watch Rachel's show. But the media was saying today that the reason why Trump is banning these taking away these security clearances from in the case of Brennan, the former director of the CIA, is because he doesn't like what they've said about him. Turns out, if you stack up everybody on that list with one single exception, and that person had peripheral involvement, but all the rest of them were directly involved with the Russia investigation in the last year of the Obama administration and the first few months of the Trump administration. All of them. They are all potential witnesses against Robert Mueller. And if Trump takes away their security clearance, you're absolutely right. They will not have access to their notes. They will not be able to testify in a meaningful way in those investigations. And the next step that I think wouldn't surprise me at all if he does this tonight or next Friday night is taking away the security clearance of Robert Mueller. And if he does that, the investigation is shut down. I mean, he doesn't have to fire anybody. And he's testing the waters with this and seeing how far he can push this before Republicans push back. And by and large, Republicans are not pushing back. I saw, Lindsey Graham saying, oh, yeah, it was just fine. These people shouldn't have said what they said. And Brennan, was out of line. No, and Trump is trying to kill the witnesses, essentially. Taya, thank you for the call. Spot on. I completely agree with you, and I'm very concerned about it as well. Rich, in Central Woolley, Washington. Hey, Rich, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Yeah, when we, the FDR Democrats, start talking about free stuff like free health care or free college education, the folks on the right push back with, well, how are you going to pay for it? I think we need to find a new name for that. I know tax funded doesn't sound so great. Collectively funded, that's pushing the envelope of Marxism maybe. I don't know. I'm asking, can we come up with a better term instead of, to explain a simple package that...
I think the commons is a good one.
The commons?
Yeah, it's part of the commons. It's the stuff that we collectively own and that we collectively administer for our own collective benefit. That should be things like healthcare, water systems, electric systems, septic systems, police, fire. I would say the internet should fit into that category, as Chattanooga has done with citywide broadband. Go ahead.
We could say things are commonly funded then.
Yeah, fund the commons.
Collectively.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that definition of the commons needs to be pushed out into the civics classes in every school in America. We're not having these kind of conversations, and we really do need to. So, Rich, that's how I would message it. Is this is the commons. This is how the commons works. This is what you want to know about the commons, and democratic socialism is about protecting and well funding the commons. As opposed to like Ryan Zinke, who's now trying to literally sell off public lands, because he's got billionaires who want to buy them and mine them and frack them. Rich, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be back. It's 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Anything Goes Friday on the Thom Hartmann Program. Speaking the truth, multinational corporations would really rather you didn't know all about. We'll be back with more of your calls right after this. And welcome back. Let's see here. Charlene in Gilbert, Arizona. Hey, Charlene, thanks for listening to us on TuneIn. What's up?
Hi, Tom. A couple of weeks ago, you had a few listeners call and talk about flying their flags upside down as a means of protesting. And I agree with you about, being concerned about having, the police or emergency services come and break down your door in concern for your safety.
Right.
What I've decided to do is whenever I mail paper mail, I take my stamp and I turn it upside down since it's a flag stamp.
Yeah, I've been doing that.
And then I go on to Facebook periodically and post a picture of an envelope with stamp on upside down and explain why I do it.
Yeah.
So that might be something people can do.
Great. Well, that's a good suggestion, Charlene. Thank you. I've done that myself. I have those flag stamps, and I'll from time to time stick them on upside down. That's a great idea. Thank you, Tom in Temecula, California. Am I saying that right, Tom?
No, it's Temecula, Tom.
Temecula. Okay. What's up?
Hi, I'm a 11-and-a-half-year continuing student at Hartman University. I was going to call on your anniversary, which was Valentine's Day, but a certain shooting got in the way. At any rate, I'm trying to get under Trump's skin with the NFL players and the kneeling. So I've got an idea that they should use. Are you familiar with the movie Black Panther?
Yeah, actually, Louise and I watched it last week.
Okay, so you got the Wakanda salute.
Yeah.
So the players stand for the anthem, put their hand over their heart, and when they get to the land of the home of the grave, then they cross their other arm over and give the Wakanda salute at the end. And that way, technically, the wrong arm is over first because your right hand.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be right overlap, but that's it.
Okay.
I just wanted to get it out to your audience, the smartest audience in TV, because yours is the smartest host on TV.
Well, thank you.
And radio.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, the Wakanda salute. We'll work on it. James in Spokane, Washington. Hey, James, quick one.
Hey, how you doing, y'all?
Good.
First time I want to ask, have you ever heard of an economist, an English economist named Thomas Robert Malthus?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay. You're aware of his theory then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Intimately.
Call about the Catholic Church. Listening to some of the evidence that they gave, some of the victims and an ex-priest, apparently the guys caught dirty, transferred to other parishes, are often the ones promoted within the church, which makes me think for 2,000 years this has been going on.
Oh, I agree.
And the people in charge.
I would say
are
not for
involved.
2,000 years, for 1,700 years, since the reinvention of the Catholic Church in 366 at the Second Council of Constantinople, and the establishment of a all-male celibate priesthood. And I'm frankly not sure that happened in 366. That might have happened somewhere in the Dark Ages. I'm not a scholar of Catholic history.
I was raised as a Catholic and went to Catholic school. And I got to tell you, like one of these victims also said, as late as the 1950s and probably into the 60s and maybe 70s, if you accused a priest, they'd sooner commit you to an institution than they would ever believe a priest would do this. And again, that has been the case for 2,000 years.
I agree. I agree. And the institution is set up in a way that it promotes this sort of a problem. And the Catholic Church needs to do away with celibacy and do away with a male-only priesthood and allow priests to marry and allow women to become priests. If they were to do that, I think within 2 generations they would largely purge this problem from their church, as the Church of England, as the Episcopal Church has already done. Thanks a lot for the call, James. Thank you so much for watching the Thom Hartmann program, our program here on Free Speech TV. We really appreciate it. The main way that we support our program, that all of us who work here get our paychecks and that we keep the lights on and whatnot here. Free Speech TV does that by asking you to donate, a couple times a year, and that keeps Free Speech TV alive. We keep our show alive principally, mostly, by advertising. We have advertisers who pay the bills. They support the program. And we've told you about some of them in the past, but really want to just move all that onto the internet. So if you would like to support our program by supporting our underwriters, our advertisers, you can go to thomhartmann.com. There's a complete list of them, or there will be soon, and just click on their little ads and find out what they have and be there for them and for us. Thank you so much.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Michael Brown's mother has decided that, enough of this hiding in the shadows, not hiding, living in the shadows, enough of this just, being upset about what happened to her son. She is going to get active. I think this is absolutely spectacular. Here's a very, very short clip of her talking about it. We need the audio. We don't have the audio. Okay, we'll have to come back to that on Monday. Bill in Clifton, New Jersey. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind?
Yeah, hi. I'm not a Christian, but I don't know or understand how abortion and homosexuality became the bane of Christianity, since there's nothing mentioned that I know of in the Bible unless you can, say chapter and verse.
There is one place There's one place in Deuteronomy and Leviticus where they are cataloging the 638, as I recall, laws that people have to live by. If they were members of the Jewish religion or Hebrews or whatever they call themselves back 2,000 years ago or 3,000 years ago. And it simply says that, men shall not lay with other men. It says it's an abomination. The subsequent lines say it's an abomination to eat shellfish. It's an abomination to wear clothing made out of 2 different kinds of fabrics. I don't see evangelicals, raiding Red Lobster. To the best of my knowledge, it's not happening. They're very selective in which of the rules they want to follow and which are the rules they want to get hysterical about.
Right, but this is a religious thing. Should we stop killing cows because Hindus live here?
Yeah, exactly. This is, and my point to people who want to say that this shouldn't be is that you're selectively you're picking and choosing from your religious texts to subsidize or to support essentially your bigotry, your fear. Most bigotry is, in fact, I would say probably all bigotry is grounded in fear. And so people who hate gay people are people who fear gay people, and many of them are probably fearing the gay impulses that they themselves feel from time to time.
Right, but all these negative things they're doing, don't they know that they're going to be undone in the future? I mean, all these, whatever he's doing, I guess they're waiting for the Democrats to come in and save the country again. Well, they sort of exploit it, knowing that a short term they get a lot of money, and then the Democrats will straighten out the world.
Yeah, who knows? But it's really unfortunate because it's causing. I mean, our having conversations like my conversation with Mary, if it's being heard by a 10 or 12-year-old gay kid, is the kind of thing that sets up a 15-year-old suicide. You know, I mean, the suicide rate among gay children is higher than any other population in the United States, and as a percentage of the population.
I think she's afraid of sex altogether.
Well, it may be. I don't want to psychoanalyze Mary. I don't know Mary, and she certainly comes across to me as a person who is trying to do the right thing and you know, believes what she believes. And I think that she has been, frankly, lied to by some right-wing preachers who are trying to get her money. But I could be wrong. I mean, who knows? Bill, thanks for the call. Spot on. Steve in North Troy, Vermont. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Greetings from the home of the bugless summer. We're seeing it up here in Vermont also.
Oh, my.
I used to shuttle hikers to and from the Long Trail to Burlington for many years.
Mm-hmm.
And in summer, I would have to, actually pull over to clean the windshield from bugs. And,
now there's none.
Yeah, and now there's none, and in the birds that eat them and stuff too. But there's also a Consumer Reports thing in today's paper where they found heavy metals in baby food, and we're getting doused with mercury and cadmium and lead from coal burning.
Yep.
And it's bound to get in the soil. And now I saw that the article on the glyphosate lawsuit, and the glyphosate is getting up in the water column, and it's falling back to the earth as rain. And we've gone from using 30 million tons a year to 400 tons a year.
Wow.
And there's nothing but GMO. Luckily, I'm in a little pocket of organic growers up here.
Yeah.
But over in Franklin County and stuff, there's nothing but the miles and miles of this GMO corn. And, our famous ice cream makers up here.
Yeah, I know. They're doing their best. Steve, I want to get one more call in here before the end of the day, but thank you for your call. Stephen in Cambridge, Mass., listening on AM 910. Hey, Stephen, what's up? You got 1 minute.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom. Oh, yeah, I was just thinking of the fearful leader there, and I came up with...
I'm sorry, what there?
Fearful. He has multiple personality disorder, and I can think of 3 New Yorkers.
Oh, Trump?
That's perfect. Bernie Madoff, Eric Spitzer, and Leona Helmsley, all rolled into one. I hope he has a good weekend.
Yeah.
Thank you. You too, Tom.
Yeah, okay, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Stephen. I'm not sure I'd put Elliot Spitzer if that was who you intended to put into that list. Elliot Spitzer was taken down by Roger Stone. Nancy, we have 30 seconds. Do you have something quick you want to say? Nancy in Los Angeles?
Oh, yes, Tom. I was thinking about messaging. And when my hero Bernie Sanders gets attacked as being too extremist, why don't they simply turn it around and say, what's extreme, not extreme about a billionaire class, where it used to be multi-millionaires and now it's billionaire classes.
Agreed.
Only
and what's
of 1%.
Yep, I completely agree. And what's not extreme about wanting to destroy Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, public schools, public roads? I mean, this is the Republican agenda, to destroy all this stuff. It is extreme. And no, Bernie is right in the middle of the FDR agenda. He's totally mainstream, as is much of the Democratic Party. And a fine thing it is, by the way. So on that note, have a great weekend. I hope you have a wonderful, safe, blessed weekend, and we will be back on Monday taking your calls and with more of the news of the day. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you Monday.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
Thank you so much for watching the Thom Hartmann program, our program here on Free Speech TV. We really appreciate it. The main way that we support our program, that all of us who work here get our paychecks and that we keep the lights on and whatnot here, Free Speech TV does that by asking you to donate, a couple times a year, and that keeps Free Speech TV alive. We keep our show alive principally, mostly, by advertising. We have advertisers who, pay the bills. They support the program. And we've told you about some of them in the past, but really want to just move all that onto the internet. So If you would like to support our program by supporting our underwriters, our advertisers, you can go to thomhartmann.com. There's a complete list of them, or there will be soon, and just click on their little ads and find out what they have, and be there for them and for us. Thank you so much.